So if you no, it's two there because we've got to move all this forward.
We might be better off folding something because I'm a bit.
Yeah, I think if you that's it. all take your seats, that would be wonderful. We're a bit late starting already. My name is Naomi. I am the current chair of the Social Liberal Forum here again at Amnesty International. The toilets are on -3, level -3, and we're not expecting a drill, so if the alarm sounds, make your way to the nearest exit. In this room, there's one there and two back, and the muster point is at the front of the building, opposite side of the road. Okay, and if the alarm does sound, do not use the elevators, back chairs for wheelchair users. Lunch will be served downstairs at 12:30 and tea at 3:35. So for some of you, this is your first time with us, and a huge welcome to you. And for others, you're regular. Boy, do we need to reboot it. We're going to the annual beverage lecture, this year given by Baroness Tyler, and we have several breakout sessions focusing on the principle of equality in the community. We'll between Norman Land. And for the tweeters among you, we're going to be using the hashtag #SLConf. We'll have questions for Tim and Norman on Twitter for those unable to. So if you're here, don't worry, just stick up your hand and I'll do my best to call you. If you've got friends, tell them to use the #SL. And we'll do our best to questions from them. But before we begin the main agenda today, there is somebody to remember, and that is, of course, our former leader, Charles Kennedy. When, above all else, I think of his fervent drive for social justice. He inspired and continues to inspire us. Social Liberal Forum to pay tribute and announce nominations for an annual Charles Kennedy Prize, and this will be a prize for social justice. Nominations will be welcomed from within and outside of party politics who have made a remarkable contribution to justice over the past year. Charles had a really unique way to turn his instinctive reactions into strategic policies, and that's not a gift given to many politicians. He told us that we should judge our societies by how they educate their young and care for their elderly. He was a good man. He was a kind man, and his brand of liberalism was a kind man. Traditional to mark the passing of a legend with a 1 minute applause. So please applause, please be upstanding if you can, and send a message.
Shall I move? Actually, for what it's worth, I am co-chair of the all-party group on social mobility, the chief executive late, which I imagine was a very interesting experience, filled with the kind of technicality
for me. So it's very daunting. And Tim, I felt it's impressive, not intellectually lazy, I think, to be looking to the past as we seek to move forward. I think we're incredibly fortunate to have a very strong intellectual tradition within the party, and in seeking to clarify and exactly what we stand for, worse than draw on the groundbreaking work occupied with 7 words: liberty, equality and community. Clear actually on we've made our mark, and we've blocked measures to rights to privacy online. We've also traditionally been strong on community, from the community politics of the 1970s and our thirst for local to being passionate advocates of devolution and localism, for activism and local distribution of power and, yes, wealth where it's needed, and the real equal, but in how we advance the cause of equality too. Of course, other values are hugely important to us, such as our and our stewardship of the environment, but they are outside the scope of this focuses as Beveridge did. My contention is that we need to say clear levels of inequality are with a society in which everyone is free to develop their talents and potential. High levels of inequality are bad for our health, as Wilkinson and Pickett articulated so powerfully in The Spirit Level, showing that society discrepancies between tend to have higher levels of crime and exhibit much less trust and cohesion. 1940s Britain, to borrow a word, philosopher. Sometimes you hear the claim that there's an inherent tension between a dual commitment to freedom and equality, that any state intervention involves the sacrifice of liberty. And yes, that was the view of classical liberals, the work of Locke, Malthus and Ricardo, a view that privileges the right of the individual to a free life from state interference. But I'm pleased to say that as social liberals, we've progressed from this line of thinking, simply being left alone to achieve genuine freedom, laissez-faire economics and a minimum going to end homelessness, social assault actually outlined by Green and Hobhouse, which as a positive freedom and the ability to make choices about the sort of life you want to live and contribute to the common good. When viewed in this way, it becomes clear what a glaring obstacle is to real liberty, power, and challenges vested in whatever shape or form they come. The reforming Liberal government elected in 1906 recognised this, Beveridge recognised this, and it's up to us to make the case today as a radical progressive force of life. Our happiness, fulfilment, the sense to which we have control of our lives, and the capacity to achieve our aspirations. And in this sense, I think it's an intensely liberal concept. It fits very well with a concern for social justice, for there is a very large proportion of the UK population for whom pursuing the good life, however they is simply not a possibility. I have in mind mental health, adequate housing, access to where the next meal is coming from. And it's my belief that the state has a very clear role in enabling each and every one of us, but particularly the most disadvantaged, to improve their well-being, providing them with the tools they need to live a life they choose. So now to update Beveridge. The Beveridge report was peerless in ambition. Of course, the welfare-focused government, giving the people had experienced in 1940s Britain, and to tackle it head-on. Things are very different today. But for me, the case for an active, enabling government is no less compelling, and we can't afford to be any less radical in our ideas. Trends in income inequality are difficult to discern in the short term, not least have fallen sharply since the 2008 crash. But it is clear that the prices of essential goods and services hitting those on low income particularly hard. The trend, however, is one of a widening gap between those on and those on point where the richest 1% of the UK households have more wealth than the bottom of the population put together. Equally shockingly, I think, the wealth of 1,000 people increased by over 28 billion last year. 20 years' worth of grocery bills for all the UK's food bank users with change left over. It's not that the liberal tradition is anti-wealth creation, far from it. We are rightly very open to new ways to grow our economy sustainably, be it using mutuals, cooperatives and employee participation, skills and apprenticeships. But if we're to be true to our core values, very different. You may have heard of a recent book, Professor John Hills from the LSE, Them and Us. His research suggests that over the course of our lives, we rely on the welfare. Moreover, the wealthier of us to benefit more as the wealthy live longer and draw more. I think we need to be bolder the myth of the deserving rich and undeserving poor that frankly shadowed on welfare reform and social policy. There are other ways, of course, in which our society is very different to that of our grandparents. For a start, many more women are in work, which I think is great, as we've begun to break down the barriers associated with female participation, particularly childcare. We also have much greater diversity of structures, alone, cohabit, marry later, divorce, or maybe are childless. Family with 2.4 children can no longer be the model when formulating public policy. Of course, the digital revolution means we're much better connected than our grandparents and great-grandparents could ever imagine. Better technology and more resources means we've got the capacity to do more to day incarnation of beverages, five giant evils, but it brings its own challenges with it, and I think we're all increasingly aware of the dark side of the internet. So a quick canter through the five giant evils. The majority of us, 3 million children growing up in relatively as currently, and frankly defining the issue as IDS seems to turn can, are still struggling to make ends meet. Since the recession began, ordinary families of any advanced economy, it patently doesn't seem right to me that you can be in full-time work and still unable to support your family without relying on benefits because your earnings are too low. I think beverage is exercised by this. I want to touch briefly now on the gender pay gap, something that's a less effective route out of poverty for women than men. The gender piece, I'm sure we would use that term, and indeed described as the fiercest of the five evils. Unemployment is historically speaking very low, but it masks a stubborn lack of opportunity, disability or a mental health condition. Young people are also disadvantaged in the jobs market. 16-year-olds are 3 times as likely to be unemployed as the rest of the population, the largest gap for more than 20 years. And low overall unemployment, although indeed the Office for National Statistics and a household budget, if you've no idea how much money is coming in each week. I'm pleased to say there has been progress by Vince Cable to exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts, but there is still, the least we can do is to ensure they're entitled to compensation if are cancelled at the last moment. And we're also seeing a growing number of people in self-employment, and in part that's a reflection of changing working patterns of the digital economy, but it's also associated with job losses since the recession. Now, for a new source of anxiety and insecurity. So thirdly, speaking more positively, we'd probably say education these days. What has become very clear in recent by the and cognitive development. In a nutshell, social mobility depends on getting the early years right, so that those born into less privileged backgrounds are starting line by children whose parents can afford the violin lessons, the maths tutor, who can read bedtime stories and help with homework. It's not that I want to stop these things happening, I just want to level the playing field. We also, I think, urgently need to develop resources to our vocational education system. Every day we rely on those with our car when it breaks down, build our homes and ensure we've got access to clean water. These are essential skills to any well-run and productive manufacturing economy depends. Apprenticeships, more of them, and I'm a great fan, but actually the number is still fairly small and the vast majority are for plus age group. We badly need proper, rigorous, and let's also, it's absolutely support those who have so far been bypassed by the digital if we're to ensure that they're able to participate fully in society. So fourthly, disease. It's of course wonderful that we're all living longer and generally healthier lives. But the challenge of how we care for each other in our old age is, in my view, the biggest social vital. And we may be thinking in coalition government, thanks to the work of Paul Burstow and Norman Lamb, through the Better Care Fund. But we also need to recognise the role that family and friends carers play. 60% of us will be a carer for a relative at lives, generating huge savings actually for the NHS. It's caring, it's a hugely demanding job, and carers often experience big costs to their own personal well-being. This room, myself included, will have their own stories to tell in this. It's really true for what's sometimes called the sandwich generation, typically my age, who find themselves trying to support children entering adulthood and often still living at home, childcare for young grandchildren, and at the same time, for elderly parents whose health is failing. It becomes incredibly difficult to work when you're in hospital at a moment's notice. Employers are not always as understanding as they can. And many of these women do end up leaving the work altogether, and their valuable skills are lost to the economy. Now, mental health is finally getting the attention it deserves after years of neglect, thanks to hard-fought battles in government and the great work, frankly, that Paul and Norman. We are probably all familiar with the stat now. One will suffer from a serious mental health condition at some point in our lives. Waiting times for treatment are still far too long, and the stigma attached to mental health is still too pervasive. We're also an immensely society, I think, as we juggle work and family in a world of information over 24/7 communications, and this is impacting on our well-being and the health of our relationships. Relationships with family, friends and partners are vital in health. Squalor, we don't tend to use that word anymore, conjure up an image, but the fact is that whilst slums are thankfully a thing of the past, we still have living conditions acceptable for many people. Now, I'm no expert on housing, but it seems to me the basic problem is that far too many people have a chronic lack of security in their housing arrangements. They don't matter. We work with adults affected by multiple problems, lives afflicted by mental ill health, homelessness, drug and alcohol misuse, offending and family breakdown. People in this very unenviable situation are often completely cut off from the community. We're also seeing a growing feeling of social family life in the community. I think it's telling that Silver People's Helpline received 8,000 calls in its first week alone, and shocking that 1 in 10 of Silverline's callers can regularly get through a week without speaking to one other person. And it seems painfully ironic that in a society that increasingly feels we cannot escape communication, as some feel they have absolutely no one to talk to. Beveridge's 5 evil giants, the picture that emerges is one in which well-being for too many people is perilously low. There are people all across the UK who feel disappointed by their lives, about paying the rent or how to pay for next year's school clothes, sad and unable to participate in everyday social and leisure activities. Too many people, in other words, being denied the opportunity for happiness and instead misery. Issues that as Liberals, we instinctively know these are things that matter and have for years, in decades in fact, been at the beating heart of our campaigns. And for many of us, these will be amongst the reasons that we joined the party in the first place. And it's this denial of happiness which I think offers us the answer to where we should be liberal energies of social justice, calling it today the well-being approach. Experience used in the past, but not be restricted by it. As Lib Dems, we have lived through a serious trauma in recent times, but out of that sees what Beveridge called the revolutionary moment. We should be bold and radical. We should demand better for all of us. Positive well-being, a national priority and a basic. And not just because I believe it's the right thing to do, although I'm absolutely convinced it is, but because the concept of well-being is full of individual empowerment, which I believe runs through the DNA of this party. The Office of Statistics were the first time asked to look at capturing a picture of national well-being, and it probably won't surprise too many, it showed that we've got a long way to go. Across the country, over 1/4 of the population scored well on all the 4 main measures. That's life satisfaction, happiness, the absence of anxiety, and feeling that your activities are worthwhile. The same population score badly on at least one. This leaves half of the population who are just okay, 1/4 of the population fulfilling their potential for another, not getting the opportunities they want. I think we should aspire to do one. As Lib Dems, we should demand that government provides the conditions for people to be better than just okay. So what I want to suggest is a sort of reinvention or reinterpretation of the Bentham, with the pursuit of well-being for everyone established as an overarching goal of social and economic policy, but for liberty, equality and community. Because gross inequalities in well-being have an impact not disadvantage, but on everyone and the economy and NHS budget. Conversely, helping children to build their emotional resilience and well-being not only is our greatest economic challenge. Now, all of this talk of GDP brings to mind for me Bobby Kennedy's unforgettable words, that whilst GDP measures equality of every sort, I quote Bobby Kennedy, it does not allow for the health of our children, the world. Indeed, on a 10-point scale, the difference between those at the top and bottom 20% is almost 5 points. And to draw us most likely to have well-being, at time and people limited by disability or ill health, people separated or divorced, and perhaps surprisingly, age. Now, I'm well aware that these types of leagues have all sorts of caveats attached. You're often not comparing like with like, and they can be misleading. But I think for identifying what government will get most financial circumstances, this is extremely important. The theory, what does this mean for policy development? Just quickly touch on areas where I think it may put current issues amongst those. So let's be bold. I want to propose that the pursuit of stable and secure employment pay for all who can work should be one of the key goals of our economic policy to address low pay. Raising the income of the poorest will deliver by far the biggest well-being dividends. I think we should to the living wage to tackle in-work poverty. More than 1 in 5 is work. Paying below the living wage means in turn the purse has to find money to subsidise low wages through tax credits, currently estimated at some 30 billion. Who knows what will happen when George Osborne announces where the 12 billion cuts to the welfare spending are going to come from. So let's become the party that really champions the living wage. And hand in hand, we need to do more to drive a culture of fair play within companies, because it turns out, and we instinctively know that being treated and paid fairly is more to well-being than absolute salaries. So I think we should do more to address executive pay differentials. Top executives shouldn't be well remunerated for the responsibilities they carry, but because they shouldn't be over-lavishly remunerated at the expense of those at the bottom. Because genuine fairness requires transparency, and also it makes good business. We only need to look at employees as our best asset. So building on the tireless work of Jo Swinson to ensure they publish their gender pay gap, let's also be clear that we want to see businesses publish the ratio between the highest and the lowest paid, and between the pay at the middle. And I would suggest that we need to look again at some of our own private income. In 2010, we had a flagship policy to raise the level of the personal allowance. And perhaps against the odds, we did it, though of course the Tories took the
My name is Sarah Green. I'm part of the Forum Executive. I oversee a lot of actions, and that includes the weekly newsletter, media relations, and all of the content that goes up on our blog. And that's what makes me so excited about this, about way forward for the Liberal Democrats. So I'm delighted that I'm joined by Sal Member, the party president, and veteran blogger, and co-author of 101 Ways to Win an Election, as I'm sure you've all seen on your seats.
coming and we were just left as they passed us at the winning post. We still rely on high volunteer and loads of leaflets as if that's the only time round. Now when I say ignored, I mean we, the federal party HQ level, because clearly you out in are very few people compared to how it was even 3 months ago. We can start to. One of the other good things, they know that. To have some questions about that later, but help get some publicity. Obviously, we're going to need to restructure. It's not just about restructuring the staff. We have to restructure our volunteers' work. Shocked over the last 5 who can do DTP up to the level that we need to do these days. And that, of course, is proportional representative. Over recent weeks has said they want to get rid of another body. So I don't want to talk about structures. You know, I don't want PC. We could spend problems somewhere. So we are going to be coming back in the autumn. We have consensus. It will come back to federal conference in September 16. So there is plenty of time to think about what you want. But FE is keen to start that debate now, and today seems a very good time to do it.
Easy question. I'm not going to need the full 10 minutes. Dominate the political scene there for years and years. The Ulster Unionists and the SDLP are now big players. We can see it from our past. You know, we nearly disappeared, the Liberal Party nearly when the Labour Party pushed our predecessors to one side. So there is no automatic right to. So, although having a new leader may in very many ways help, particularly such a sort of two such to choose from, in itself, choosing a new leader isn't enough. And we've seen the mistake, particularly the Tory party, made repeatedly in the post-Thatcher years of new leader in 2010 general elections. I think we can look back with a little bit of envy, because it is now our high watermark to look back to. It's quite understandably become somewhat rose-tinted in retrospect. But if you look at what, as it was, for example, who was a social liberal forum, people like Duncan Brack or Richard Grayson were saying in the aftermath of the 2005 meeting. It's also, if we look back at those, the better years, and we were an overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male-dominated parliamentary party, and through our, many other to deal with that, such as with the European elections. Although it's worth remembering, at our height we had a decent couple of handfuls of MEPs, good on gender score. On other issues, criteria still wasn't really that great. So we need to rebuild addresses that issue of diversity. We need to rebuild in a way that addresses our local government base, because if you look at the proportion of councillors who are Liberal Democrat, number peaked back in 1996. So for a long time we were really half our peak again now, but I think it's important to remember that there's no automatic expectation that our years we had a problem stagnating. And I think also rebuild in a way from the past, because if you look at the people who voted in 20, a large chunk, what was their preferred outcome, didn't say their preferred outcome was a Liberal Democrat. And therefore, almost whatever we did, and there's an awful debate about how we could do better than we actually did in the aftermath of 2010. And in a way, good that we were reaching people and getting other people to vote for us, but fundamentally, when our election results on lots of people voting for us who don't actually want us to win, a hung parliament is at best going to be desperately painful, and at worst, but the best is never going to be that good. So how do we address those problems? Well, I think what it boils down to, all of them, sort of 4, 5, 6% Tories have faced in the past, and that Labour in particular face at the moment, where often the challenge is how do you reach out beyond, and certainly if, like with Labour or Tories, you've got a core vote of in the high 20s or low 30s, that is a priority. For us, the problem though, I think, is that our core vote is so tiny, and having a much larger core vote should be our priority. Now, the good news is, David Howarth, former MNIS, from the data that's available from the British election study for a pamphlet David publishing in the Democrat a few weeks ago. So who else shares the same values as that? That comes to around 20% electorate. And that is actually a pretty decent, be able to do well in elections, our list elements and so on, which is quite a lot. It's a vote to be able to get back on track, and it's a big enough core vote to provide the basis for winning more Westminster seats. Undoubtedly, as in the past, we'll need to reach out to people beyond that. But imagine how much different the last Parliament would have been if we'd actually had a core group of loyalists of around, up towards 20% of the vote, rather than 4% of the vote. And indeed, you don't go hard, because look, Labour has had prosperous parliamentary cycles over the last few decades, but one of the reasons Labour survived in 83, one of the reasons Labour survived in both 2010 and 2015, is because if you have a big enough core vote, even if everything else is going wrong, even if you are finding every possible foot to shoot yourself in, you can actually come out of it in a much better state, core vote. In terms of distribution, is a good thing. Who is the sort of people who shares those values? Well, the typical person is young. I don't know if by accident or David picked as young the definition of 45 or under. I fall into that. On moderately above average income, disproportionately private renters, proportionately from a BAME background. Now, obviously, given that a smaller group, like say the BME population, even if the group is disproportionate, naming the typical person is all vote seriously, and to infuse it through all the different elements of preparation, and to make sure that we need to core voters, and that I think is quite a policy front. If you think about housing, then we talk about housing in terms of building new houses and ownership. Rarely we talk about renting. Sort of diversity, we will in terms of sort of 2/3 female, but again we're all white, let alone if you get into sort of other diversity criteria. And if you think about the way we make policy, we tend not to say this is the group we really want to appeal. These are our, how do the two best meet? It's sort of by luck or chance, or maybe towards the end of the Parliament, a little bit of polling and somebody from HQ coming along to FBC saying, I really want some different policies. We don't deliberately set out as our mission through all the different parts of what we do in the party to build a core vote. And that, at its simple...
About your pamphlet, where can people access that and when?
I haven't actually prompted that question. I realise...
No, he hasn't.
So I'm putting it online, and I'll be sending it out. If any of you give me an email, mark.pack@gmail.com, pack@gmail.com, and I'll quite happily make sure you get emailed a copy as well. Good question.
Excellent question. Mike, should we start at the back of the room and come forward? So, I think it's Neil, actually. Make David work hard. Tell us your name and where you're from.
Seem to be low, but as both speakers, we neither now have parliamentary seats nor even target councils. So, given that situation, we have to rebuild slowly. Could suggestions be made both to campaigns department and to ALDC? Material sent out at election time isn't always skewed to target seats or even key developing seats. In my local authority area, we held most of our council seats against the national trend 7th, but we did, in my recollection, of either national or, I have to say, campaigning material. It's not to say that's all inappropriate, but can we please now look at
the mic next to you, David. This is really good.
Thank you very much. My name's Duncan Brack. I'm Vice Chair of the Federal Policy Committee, fellow Mark. Just comment on the question. one important step in rebuilding the party is to be clear and for. So the FPC is prompting a debate on the party's core philosophy, if you like, and we'll have a consultation paper out, quite a short one, by about the end of July. Sessions on this, and we hope that local parties and regional parties and the SLF and people like that will take it up and debate and be clear about what we... To the extent that we used to think we had a core vote, it tended to be people who were more highly educated social classes, more likely to be graduates, likely to work in the...
Matthew, I should point out that the Social Liberal Forum has put up a motion on the transport, so I hope you have a debate.
Very good motion it is too. Hi folks, Matthew Hulbert from Hinckley and Bosworth, where until May we were a majority-run Lib Dem council, and which we're not anymore. The Tories took it off us, despite great work in Hinckley and Bosworth, and you know, I'm afraid I really do think that is because, and I think it's because of, you know, when I went knocking on doors in my ward, which I lost, I'm no longer a councillor, people were saying, I've got a big booming voice, you see, election, you know, with people we'd never expect you to do, and reverse your positions on various things like tuition fees. I don't think I heard the word trust. I don't think I did from any of you today. That's the big thing, isn't it? How do we rebuild trust?
Okay, so we've got about trust, Neil's question about materials focusing on target and developing seats, and Duncan had a question for you, Mark. So do you want to address them?
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the core vote, Duncan, yes, so this sort of typically is also a graduate and somebody on moderately. It's that rather than specific policy issues. If you look at the individual policies we stood at in May, overwhelmingly they were actually pretty popular. It wasn't that we had unpopular policies. That was on the point about rebuilding. I guess one thing that we did get right very much in our the number of seats we were targeting and sort of fighting seriously at the Westminster level basically doubled. So it's possible to combine targeting with wider growth. The key is to do it well. Or national campaigns on sort of on the Human Rights Act. That the number of people who will be really strongly motivated by that may well not be enough to say help Matthew win back his council seat, but is a key component of that core vote, and therefore gives every local party local election is, however many people they do or don't have who actually want to be councillors and so on.
Is on trust, and you're absolutely right, and it wasn't just tuition fees, and had we not, there would have been something else, because the problem was we were seen to be part of the left, and we went into a coalition with the right. Soft left people who would have supported us felt versus since the 1st of March. A couple. Looking at you both, you aren't typical. They're male. No, typical. They're male, 35, and they are white. Who have come to the internet to join have formed a very particular community, and they are professionals, and they're not always, but often city-based. If we sit back in our think, well, that's all right, they'll just flood to join us from the internet, develop that. I come from an area that has a county coordinating committee, so a sub-regional structure where the stronger seats, whether it's local government or Westminster seats, help the others and then help us return at election time. And a lot of that was lost over the last 3 or 4 years, and I would encourage other areas. It is not going to empower people to do that. We absolutely have to do that, and we do need toolkits available, which is why I'm really pleased local parties have been using how to get to know if you're a target seat as in March. You actually get people from some of the neighbouring seats with
The purple jacket.
Okay, Kingston we've lost, but we've still got the delivering vote at that, and the core supporters. I was thinking of all those deliverers I've in Kingston. They are women. They are from ethnic minorities. They are the people who are our core vote. The second, just a comment on trying to target the renters. Incredibly difficult. Our current housing campaign in London doesn't touch them. It is possible to. The problem is those people are on 6 months tenancies, maybe a year, and moving them, and they move on. You're trying to target them, find them, and keep a tab on them as they move, because they have to continually move on.
We come across here, David, so this gentleman here.
With the floor, with 930 on the night, assembly elections, on anywhere has got any insights how we tackle the issue of UKIP, because my take on it, you know, and I'm minded of the presentation that David gave at the last
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure you won the by-election. That was the councillor who unseated Vince's seat. That was, but what the point I want to use the old techniques. We chose a candidate who's local off or being put off by being asked to deliver leaflets only. I'm pleased to hear, Sal, about constitutional changes, because within our local party we've got ward parties, so we're...
How do we deal with UKIP and difficulty of target?
Emily, you've done an enormous amount of work on housing in London, and I'm sure that the experience you've had is going to help us in going to be a major issue in the London elections next year. I mean, it's already a major issue in London, but how do we follow private renters? It's difficult unless we've got their email address. And I think that's one of the reasons campaigning becomes very important, is we keep in touch with people that way. And I'm going to revert to a conversation about members, but these aren't members, they're supporters. Having people joined by the internet, new members joined by the internet, we have emails from the what's more, they're good email addresses. And part of our problem about those of us who've been around a long time is doesn't know whether the email is good or not. Housing, particularly the rent, leaving you guys worried about UKIP. We will be the only polls show over a third in this country are in favour of staying in, about a third are in favour of leaving, and of the remaining third, a good percentage of them understand the jobs and economic argument likely to come. That's the and election, well done. Actually, it was interesting. The Scots were out of government. I think we're going to see that a lot. On executive members, how do we persuade executive branches to give up? That's why we've got to have everyone protect their own position. If you've got a bit of a power base, but the debate for the next 6 months has actually been about how does this party work well and most effective. And some of us, I mean, it might be that you don't want a president. You might decide you don't want a century, and the way we're working, that we're working in. So actually, if it's going to simplify things and members are going to feel more engaged, get rid of the branches.
Come back on any of those.
Just a couple of points. On UKIP, I think there weren't many cheers we were doing. Actually, there was a higher level of support for an in-vote in a referendum. So in a way, we don't have to be too scared about the prospect of a European referendum. But the sticks in my mind why YouGov asked this question, but they asked people, how worried are you that the world will end during your lifetime in a nuclear Armageddon? And voters were much more likely to say that's what they think is going to happen than anyone else. And in a way, in a slightly bizarre way, but I think also in quite a good way, an accurate way, it captures the mindset and attitude has very successfully tapped into pessimism. And looking backwards and thinking, can we just not get on and do something? If you think all the different things that are wrapped up into why people vote UKIP, actually the fear of it, thinking that this is falling apart is all capture the emotional essence of what being a UKIP voter is like. And where it slightly goes back, sounds and looks like, presents the things that you care about as well. For the people it tries to appeal to, does that very well in some respects. And maybe just quickly on the private renters question, because I think there's another ties in partly with Sal's answer, which is, for good reasons, we're very geographically focused in the way we organise. First past the post in the UK for local elections, we've got first past the post for Westminster elections, we've got some elements of first past the post even in the London, Scottish and Welsh devolved elections. There's a lot of merit in that. What I think we've not yet done, and this ties into the issue about private renters who are very mobile and move around between different local parties, is match that with a degree of online. So if you join the party, you essentially get signed up to two things. You get signed up to a set of federal party communities, overwhelmingly by email, which will follow you as you move around the country, which is good, and you get your local party details. So the way of getting involved in a party has, we say to you, you have to do that locally, geographically, rather than, for example, having a virtual community, if you want as an electronic local party that you get welcomed into, that for some people may be just as much involved, that are not purely reliant on where they live, because that's not going to suit everyone.
Should we give David some more exercise? The room.
Which one?
And on your... Yeah.
Hi, my name's Simon Dedeni. For Mayor in Hackney last year, and also for Hackney North, so welcome to Hackney. So when you've got so many people who are overwhelmingly pale and male, you're actually increasing diversity in Hackney, because we are... That's not at all. I really wanted to ask a question based on a couple of things in terms of our core vote, emotional essence. I think it's crucial that taking it onto the terrace out, who are you? Who are you? The kind of impression we get of actually people not knowing who we are, and so getting the result described that people not necessarily wanting a Lib Dem government. What are we doing at the...
Could you pass it to the lady at the back? I think she's had her hand up since the very beginning.
I think that leads on to the Liberals for years, because it resonated for me. At the time, we were probably against apartheid in South Africa, sorts of things that young people really identify with, and we need young people to take the 2010 elections, which of course fell away afterwards, and we've got to do a lot to undo that damage.
Tell me of your name, sorry, I didn't catch it.
I beg your pardon. Melanie Winterbourne.
Thanks, Melanie. And for the gentleman at the back with glasses. I'm enjoying sending David around this room, it's quite fun.
Michael Leeds, one to start with, I think we ought to ban the abbreviation Lib Dem, which really means nothing in terms of no voter under 45 from. Full title all the time. It might be something to do with libraries otherwise, or even the product. But to go more serious things, I'm reached a horrifying age where I almost am liberal. I don't mind reading the damn. But there are lessons from history that they may make them less applicable. But we have gone through this before, certainly in 1970 and 1999. And if you recall, 1970, we were at roughly the same opinion poll level. 4 years later, the 74 election and so on. So it's not unusual. The two things that epitomised the revivals in 70 and 79, parallel, there was an original as well as an rigorously intellectual movement, side by side. And there was a lot of material produced both times. And if you want to go back to the Jurassic Age, Grimman did that with a tiny party. He produced, with groups, material well thought of by people who were experts in the... But the two things need to go hand in hand. And then there is the core vote being attractive because they see that there is something worth believing in. One of the problems with the core vote is that if we are continuing, heaven help us, with targeting activity in a lot of places, you don't attract it anymore, and so on. Just as when our poll rating went up at the 2010 election with the Nixon lead, something like, I think it was 9 points.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to turn to you, that's right, Mark. So we've got Who Are We? Planning the use of Democrat and proactive policies, Melanie.
Is our recovery from in the sort of late 80s, early 80s. And it's interesting that you think, what would the important be the first supporters of privatisation and so on. But if you look, what actually were the issues that helped the party? It was Hong Kong and former Yugoslavia. And those were, and we have to be a little bit careful about not going overboard on this, but those were issues, neither of which were at the top of the public's agenda. I think that comes slightly on to your question, Simon. The short answer to what are we doing about that at the moment is not. And in fairness to all the different people, it's because that isn't his job. if you think about that sort of revival of those, because by something that has to infuse the whole organisation. So I think we have an opportunity here with the fact that leadership candidates have said they want to change how we select our deputy leader, so that it doesn't have to just be another white man from the existing parliamentary party, because that also sort of begs the question, well, what's the job of the deputy leader? It seems to me that the role of the deputy leader. I think there's a lot of merit in saying that we make a leader who is essentially a campaigning chair for the party, therefore clearly a very different role from the president, complementary to but different from the president, but who can therefore tie together many of these different strands. And because it's something that therefore won't end up falling different sort of traditional remits and outlooks and so on. So I think that is providing an answer to your question. I would just briefly say our tuition report was published, so at the point at which nobody, including ourselves, yet really knew what we were going to do on tuition fees, we lost between a third and a half of May 2010 support. Now, given that in total, not just absolutely a huge chunk of our support before we were going to do on tuition fees, and therefore I think we need to be careful about, just like I said, simply changing leader in itself isn't enough. Simply having a new higher education policy isn't enough. It was the act of, as Sal was talking about, it was the act of us going into coalition in a way which I still, with hindsight, think was the best of the options available to us. But what we had led to respect who we are as a party doing things meant that before we did on an issue like
the interesting thing about all three of those was neither Paddy nor Charles could have predicted those before they became leader. It's about how you respond to circumstances. Using our philosophy and our values, our position became clear. And I think we need to remember that. And which were our best votes. I can't remember, 13, 14. Within 2 or 3 years, we were increasing in councillors, and then with premise, we've positions before, but back, it is how we fall back, and that comes back to Merline's point about being out there. I wasn't suggesting stop campaigning in the old ways, new ways too. And on the points that both Simon and Melanie made, the narrative for us is something that consultation at conference is very important about, because whilst our leader will espouse it, it is of course the party that decides our narrative. And we'll hear about that to guide them as well as us.
Lunch is available. It is, if you haven't yet been downstairs, it's out to your left and down the stairs, and there should be lots of food and drink waiting for.
I like the point about how everyone wants to abolish some other layer of the party.
It's so good and so not say it.
Yeah.
We've got that 2015.
That really well.
But they've started again because they were is exactly what I mean by empowerment. And so what I mean, I'm not going to we meet quarterly, we run training sessions for the whole of Hertfordshire, and then we go and help in each other's by-elections, and we help in February, we go into the black hole seats nominations so that they can stand a full slate of candidates. So I mean, really is back scratching all round. But yes, we've got to, it's only going to work if each area decides on what they want to do. Yeah. No, exactly. Absolutely right. Thank you. How are you?
be as
FE,
fair
we discussed this last Saturday at and in fact, the leadership programme for top candidates this time to recruit. We actually asked people for their background. 45 people in the programme came from a low socioeconomic background. So, but the point is, we're not going to do anything elsewhere.
And obviously we have to take, given what the poll turned out like, we have to take the poll evidence with it.
And other areas do.
Yeah.
Some other areas do. And HQ doesn't have.
Is that an acceptable level? Can you?
Yeah.
Is it okay? All right. It's okay.
That's what. Right. And make a start because it's quite stuffy in here. We're going to leave the door open. If the noise outside is too intrusive, we will need to close it. But I'd like to keep it open because of the heat. So my name's Paula Keaveney. I'm a Liberal Democrat from Liverpool. I'm on the governing Social Liberal Forum, and this session has a board heading, you'll have noticed, looking at it in our agenda. So we're looking at government and perhaps how government could and should be reformed. And I've got two speakers who are going to first of all speak in turn, and then there'll be quite a big chunk of time for questions and discussion. Was the first leader of King. So that tells you the formation of the Liberal Democrats. That tells you how long it was. He was chief of Centre Forum for a couple of years, went on to be a special advisor to Ed Davey. Clearly has very current experience of a range of issues in government to tell us perhaps about what worked and what didn't work. Daisy Cooper was the manager of Norman Baker's election campaign recently. She stood for Parliament on 2 occasions and was one of our 3 candidates, all women, I'm pleased to say, all of party presidents. But when it comes to questions, we obviously will be here. So over to you, Chris.
Is this working? Right. Thank you very much. As she said, this is an extremely broad title, so I thought I'd just where my perspectives come from, and then run into some of my experience both as a council leader in the very distant past and also more recently from my time as a special advisor, and also some of my professional experience, which is relevant as well. So my perspectives are, first of all, from a professional perspective, I started my career as a civil servant, and so following that, I spent time as an advisor to government for one of the big four accounting firms, so where I latterly ran the public sector. So I've got that experience, but then I've also got the political perspective, both from running a local authority, being a councillor, and then, as Paul has said, as a SPAD. So how do we reform government? I think there's certain things that Liberal Democrats could say which would sort of trip easily off the... It would be that decisions at the lowest possible level, for local authorities, communities, etc., that there should be real democratic accountability, decisions taken. There should be clear political so that it's not just about management, it is a clear lead. And then also, I think more is a stress on evidence-based policy making, and I'll come back to in a bit more detail later. But I think all those, at least most of those, I'm not sure that anyone might disagree with, because they are standard things that Liberal Democrats say. But from my experience, does government do well? What does it do badly? And I think the first point to make is both within central government, local government, etc., most civil servants, most local government officers are trying to do. I think it's important that we don't denigrate the job, even like to come into conflict with them on certain issues. It's not generally because they are some sort of malign influence, and I'm sure being involved in we bring an effect change. A few examples of that from recent experience I had Department of Energy and Climate Change. One of the things that pushing very hard, where we had the most resistance, was stressing the role was so important, because they'd look at the figure on how much it cost to generate a gas-fired power station, or even a nuclear power station, even an offshore wind farm. Why are you so obsessed with this thing called energy when actually it's more expensive? And what we pains to say is, first of all, this is not just about generating, but it's also about creating a movement, and it's creating the dynamic for people to change behaviour, and that's much better done at a level than it is an understanding of the use of energy themselves in their community, recognising that they, use it, the fact that it needs to be generated for them to use it, rather than it being just something that happens, that comes through the wires, that you're far more to get both support for things like onshore wind farms or solar farms, support for taking action to save energy, than if it's something remote that is they are being told. And we just had immense difficulties get this understood within the department. And one of the funniest things was the civil servants came to Ed. It was about a year after the first ever community energy strategy, and they said, "Do you know what? This is the most viewed document on the DEC website by far," and they were just sort of amazed. But that showed that actually it was sort of motivating people, and it was part of a movement. And I think there are other examples of that's a lesson. In terms of reforming governments, one of the roles of a politician, and indeed particularly a Liberal Democrat politician, is how we see government as part of a movement, as part of leading behaviour, the sort of change that we want. I think November of a year, and we'd say, "Have we got any money left?" And they'd say, "For the local authority," and we'll then, they'll have to be ready to go by the end of March, so it fits the year. They were then rather surprised when actually it's time for the local authorities to get mobilised and to respond to this. So that's a sort of a negative about the civil service view of local authorities. I have to say also, in terms of capability and capacity among in two-tier systems. So I think that is something, all very well saying things should be done at the lowest feasible level, but it's very good. Liberal Democrat, of course, but clearly was. So how then, what were sort of perspectives on how we should reform government? I think the first thing, as I've said, is that politics isn't just about management. I think there is a real role for government in terms of creating movements for change and almost campaign as campaigners. What that Ed pushed very hard, encouraging people to consider switching their energy supplier, and we had a advertising campaign about that. Was part of encouraging people to take action, which is something Liberal Democrats, I think, should be. I mentioned earlier about evidence-based policy, and I, on the one hand, who can agree with making policy based on evidence, but it can be a real excuse for the status quo and actually never really doing anything until you've done a pilot study and you've evaluated for. And some of the big changes that have taken place over the last 20 or 30 years, and people may have different, but for example, some of the changes that Margaret made in terms of privatisation, etc., that wasn't based on well, if we compare what will happen under the I would sort of, going too far, the thing is sort of, there's manifesto policies and party policies, and there's, you know, are we doing this? To some degree, we looked at the manifesto, and there were things in we could do, perhaps, although it wasn't in the coalition agreement, we could slip it through. But there were also lots of policies, party policies, which we sort of never got round to doing. And I'll give one example, which is a dreadful condemnation of me. I chaired, as Gordon will know, I chaired the party working group on employee. And one of employee engagement, our recommendations from that was that we never got round to doing it. And then it was sort of 6 months away from the election. What happened to that idea I had of an employee representative on that? And I think there's been a mechanism for being a vigorous process of the party, perhaps through the backbench committee, sort of trying to say instead of what sometimes be the case, which was sort of second guessing that one had taken on particular policies where it had sort of in the course of the party do that. You shouldn't do something on that. Then I think there is a final couple of issues. One is local authorities. I made some comments about capability and capacity within local authorities. I think there is also a real, as we Democrats, which we see in relation to some of the things to do with in relation to climate change, where if we have legal obligations as a government for meeting certain targets, whether that's to say to local authorities, you have the responsibility for doing this, then there's a serious risk, I think, that we then wouldn't be meeting those targets. So how do we marry those two things about national targets?
Interesting points there for me, particularly the one about sort of government as campaigner and how, you know, that can effectively be used. So we're going to hear from Daisy next, and after time for questions and discussion. Daisy.
Still awake? Yeah, I know. Chris started off by saying that it was how do you reform government? It's better to answer a completely different question, which is more about views on vote. Have you knocked on a door and spoken to said, oh, I'm so because I really love your policy on one of those things? So my starting point is, how does the public perceive our agenda of reforming government and reforming governance? These reforms impact on their lives all the time, but they don't see it. We haven't explained to them how it impacts their lives. So my starting point, our starting point, should be their starting point. And I think the starting point for most people, and often it's because they are. We are one of the most centralised governments, certainly one of the, I think the most centralised government of all OECD countries. And there are phenomenal concentrations of power in our system, as in the system of how we govern our country whole. And we are a party driven by commitment and reforming governance. I think our starting point should be, we recognise you feel powerless, and actually, most of the time you are. And we want to change that. We want to break down those barriers. We want to break up those concentrations of power so that you have a different political party. Listen to the language they use the word power. It's UKIP's starting point. They get it. UKIP has had a very successful campaign, and they have a there is this evil thing out there called Europe, and it has all the power in the world. And we want to bring back that power from Europe, and we want to bring it back to Britain, or to England, depending which day of the week it is for them, whatever their we need to expose that argument using exactly the same language. This is not about taking back power from Europe, it's about them getting even more power in Westminster, and Westminster can abuse that power against you as the individual. We don't have, our response to UKIP has been, but Europe's really good, there's lots of really good things, you get free roaming tariffs when you go on holiday. We don't challenge them on the same arguments that they are using. We need to start talking about power in that way. We think that in government, we ran this campaign about AV and reforming the political system. MP have been getting credit because they've been arguing about which bench they're going to sit on. Why? Because there's a perceived power struggle about who. We just talked about it's easy as one. So my proposal is really that we think about how as campaigners we can harness a narrative and a opposition and at a local level and as a national party. And now this gets very dangerous because I've come up with half a dozen ideas on the train this morning and I haven't run them past anybody, not even my very good trusted friend Chris over there. So these are points for discussion. In government, we should be every single policy Conservatives announce that they pretend is giving. They use that phrase all the time. Free schools, we're giving power to. Actually, you know, you may be giving some power to us. They may can get them to that point. How do we get them there? Well, there is no capacity for scrutiny. We do not believe themselves. We want a citizen scrutiny panel. We want the citizens to have power. Tell me what you think about that idea. What about the political centre? Do we think there's a problem with our British financial centre and our political centre being just a mile apart? Rather than sort of say this could be our northern powerhouse, actually we can talk about power. So we are very concerned that these strong, influential centres are very close to each other, because when that happens, power corrupts. So our political centre. Debate about it. Some of you may agree, some of you may disagree, but let's have a debate about moving our political centre to Manchester or Birmingham or Torquay. That's a cheer from Adrian. What about the fact our voting system is broken? We all know that. The answer is STV. Well, it might be. But actually, what's the message that resonates with people? What if you went out to somebody and said, should we have a local referendum on opting out of Conservative cuts? What about that? The consequence of that would be that a referendum on opting out of National Conservative effectively means demanding a devolution of massive, and it's all about power, who has control, and it's exposing the lack of power that people have in our political system. So these are ideas that may work in practice, they may just be good, but these are ideas that are based around the people feeling powerless and the fact that we believe in taking.
Thanks to both very different but very thought-provoking presentation. This gentleman and the lady.
Explicitly has been uttered as you're thinking about empowerment and the problems of people feeling powerless and the extent of the power of these big four, big three.
Okay. One here.
It's nice to be a gentleman. Just a couple of things for Chris, really. One, first of all, is the sort of Peter Hennessy issue. One of the worst pieces of legislation, probably of the coalition, or at least the worst that has been admitted, was the equipped. And as far as I understand the continental model of the cabinet, there would be people who would give defence advice to cabinet ministers who are not themselves defence ministers. The second issue is the one of local government, which you touched on a couple of times. Obviously, I challenge you over the two-tier system. What I have found is that there is no understanding whatever in Whitehall of anything which is not a London borough. construct something for London boroughs, and that it doesn't go outside. That's partly because of where civil servants live. But also, and I challenge it, is surely for the civil servants in training, not just to move to Cardiff to do something funny in Liverpool, to do something funny in Liverpool, but to move to Liverpool City for 6 months. Or
said something that I was intending to say. Up here, is it?
Yeah, you might have to have it quite close to your mouth.
Right. Yes, a query about the relationship between central and local government and the local government. I think you would 40 years get, but people who act like children. And if you don't give a response, if you just treat them as minor managers, what you will get is minor managers. And I would have proper devolution would, at least over a certain length of time, it might take a little time, really produce people who can do the job. There might need to be or something. But I just wonder what, looking at what Chris said about civil having a clue, not a clue about two-tier systems. Many years ago, when I was a union representative, I actually went up to Shire Hall at the top tier to find a civil servant. The meetings.
Can I ask you to, because we've got quite a few people.
I don't need one top of the tree yet, or it's the top of the tree now, but maybe that's where it was right.
Okay, so I've taken 3. I'm going to get the answers, and then I'm aware of hands up then, so we'll take the next 3. So we've got basically democracy and whatever happened to local income tax. We've got how can you, you've got I'm working with local government. So who off? Take the first one, and then perhaps
doorstep. And in my neighbouring ward, which is work at University of Brighton, I may well use first to talk about power.
the question was more that we weren't talking about it, and it wasn't being mentioned.
Okay, well, yeah. Let's answer that one. On the second issue, obviously, Catherine picks up on this point about central civil service not understanding local government. I think that would be an excellent if we couched it in the right language about the fact that central government doesn't understand what local people need. And the way to do that is to get people out of Westminster to come and talk to local people. So let's not talk it in terms of structures and some kind of HR policy of, having a placement in different places, perspective of a resident and power and all that kind of thing. I mean, I do wonder whether as well, if this is an idea important, this could be quite an interesting campaign for the Tory government to say, right, we want in 10 years, and we challenge you in the next budget to set up a capacity, set up evolution in 10 years.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I think that on Paul's point, I think it was, as Daisy said, that we were using those necessarily. Daisy very much was saying about the Big Six, the Big Four, encouraging people to switch in energy supplier in terms of also challenging the providers energy was very much what we spent a lot of our time doing. So the number of people who had the non-Big Six as an energy went from 0.5% in 2010 to I think it's now 12.5%. Now you can say, okay, well 12.5% isn't very much, but it's a hell of a lot more than half. So encouraging competition. On Chris's question about what is the process, a right process for any change around the committee involved. Frankly, it's one of the jobs that typically the special advisor does, to look at what the right round is, what the proposal is, and say, actually, not sure about this, certainly to challenge it from a political perspective. I think one of the issues there, and it certainly used to all the right rounds. It's one of my jobs. It was very interesting, but frankly, the amount of time that one had really to think about it and consult people was limited, and one of the reasons of time. I think there is a need for a slightly bigger sort of political office, numbers, perhaps 5, perhaps up to 10, which in the scheme of things, the government department is very, very small. But I think that would help in terms of making sure that there is not just to decisions made within the department, but also on the issue about the exchange service and local authorities. I have some sympathy with it. There could always be more. It's not more than there used to be. So, you know, about recent permanent secretaries, there was Bob Kerslake in CLG, who was previously chief exec of. There was Lynn Homer, who's been MRC and I think Transport, who was previously chief exec of Birmingham, and there's been 1 or 2 others as well. So my comments were a generalisation, but I would push back and say I think there is an issue about capability, about really transferring a lot more responsibility and power to local authorities. I'm not sure that the district council partnership arrangements between London boroughs, perhaps to deal with those sorts of issues.
Okay, right. Before Mark, I'm going to ask Mark. Were you just mentioned Malta? Yes. He has a running riff, which is that someone at Lib Dem events mentions Malta every time.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on Catherine's point about the way central government has dealt with local over the last decades, and the question that Chris addressed. You end up with stale policies and stale, and the whole question of reform, encouragement of better is linked, in my mind, to the reform association.
Hello, I'm Anna Tucker from. It just struck me that the debate that we're having now is it's similar to the one we were having earlier today in this room about how the Lib Dem. In both situations, we've got this infrastructure it's got lots of vested interests, lots of structure, lots of competing and actually, I think we need to building on what Daisy was saying about, looking at it from perspective, trying to side in view and think, actually, what's the purpose of local government? And, these departments that we've got, DWP.
Sound observation, Gordon. That's no gentleman, he said. 2 quick question, if I may. I like Daisy's language. People do say power, and because they understand what that means. And I was the candidate there in 1983, and at a public meeting, days when we used to hold public meetings, and what's more, people actually came. I was asked the question about what I wanted if I was elected, and my very quick answer, and it remains true today, is down. So I'm not interested in moving it to Manchester, but doing away with it. Then we can have a proper federalised system under Europe, and that's radical language that we ought to be talking about. Chris, I think you've suffered from the disease of having been in government and now defending it, you see. And I'm reminded of, you sound like sort of great days of the Raj and explaining to the Indians, but again, well, of course we'll make mistakes, but they'll be our mistakes. And not our ministers were so timid in government of trying to change the way in which government was actually run, because we approached it as if the change to government legislation as opposed from the way in which things were just managed.
Well, three really big topics there, sort of why are our, the whole issue of structures and a bit more about relationships within government. So who wants to? Chris, I'll let you go first.
Well, thank you, Roger. I mean, just to be clear, what I was not saying is that there shouldn't be devolution. That wasn't at all what I was saying. What I was saying, I think we need to, the issue of, but I think we need to be really self-critical about what the level is at which it's, the, sorry, my eyes are going. In terms of the monopoly parties in running councils, I might have the necessarily a well-run authority, because I think year of running Sutton, and I think they've done it very well. And you know, I think there are lessons to be. Point about the sort of timidity. I mean, I think I suspect government, sort of the cabinet ministers would probably now recognise this. There was. You know, there was that Rose Garden phase when I wasn't part of the government then, or you know, I wasn't a special advisor, and there was this timidity, but I think also, you know, you can't get all away from the fact that we were not the majority party in the government, and therefore that inevitably.
A few things. First, gentleman down here, you said, you know, the answer to the one-party state majority is to change the voting system. Yes, I don't think you'll find anybody in the room who would disagree. What I would say is, you know, explain and persuade with emotion. Very good at explaining with reason, and we are actually quite bad at persuading with emotion. And emotion requires a different kind of language. If I go back to this point about power and where it has it and all that kind of stuff. Anna, I wasn't quite sure whether you were talking, you said were you talking about party structures within the Lib Dems, or were you talking about people dealing with different levels of councils? Yeah. Okay, public sector as well. Okay, that's fine. So I guess I would say on the public sector element, I have this little phrase of this sort of computer says no society. Where you go to your bank, you go to your energy company, you go to your local district council, and that's not my to go to see somebody else, have to go ask somebody else, and it totally winds me up. And just one example, you know, as a local councillor, you know, I went knocked on some doors, and there's a roundabout near a tunnel, and someone said, oh, you know, and therefore it's an air pollution, and so I'm there, so air pollution. Plus some Quango-y air pollution monitoring network, which is Speedwatch plus speed cameras, which is by the police. Highways, which is the county. You know, I've got the part of the pavement that's owned by the district. Think, right, well, as a councillor, I'll convene them. You know, so get through all of that muddle and those barriers, rather than saying, I'm only a district councillor, there's nothing I can do about it. You know, actually, you should be active as campaigners and breaking down. In terms of I mean, I could talk about this till the cows come home, but I won't. Part of my pitch when I went last year was that part of the reason I was doing it was because I'd become so frustrated at the complete and utter lack of accountability in the party, and the fact that we have these very obscure structures, and sometimes you have excellent committees all pulling, you know, all wanting to party improve, but members have very little sense of who's taking decisions on what and how do they hold them accountable. What happens when you take a decision? Who is responsible for making sure that it's implemented? And I think two major problems. I think on the campaign side, my personal view, and I respect the fact that others may not agree, but my personal view is that we completely lost our way with messaging during the campaign, but there were several of us at the top of the party who pointed this out more than a year ago. And changed because there was a pseudo group set up that was not accountable to anybody, and it wanted to do, and there was this groupthink sort of structure at the top of that from happening. You know, if that group had had some level of some other body or agency that was elected by the members, we might have been able to itinerary side. You know, as a party, we have a duty of care to every single volunteer, member or non-member. Everybody who volunteers for us, we have towards them, in my view. Single members should know if something goes wrong or there's some kind of inappropriate, feel uncomfortable in a situation, where do they go, how do they complain, and who is responsible for taking filled by. But actually we need to stop that happening in our own party. We can't talk seriously about reforming government and giving power back to people if we don't get our own house in order in the first place. And the last question over here was about why were we so timid? Well, I may not have the answer to this, but my perspective would be that at the start, in 2010, we justified our going into coalition because of the state of the economy. Then we were perceived very quickly to only be talking about political reform and introducing AV. The Tories said, well, even the Lib Dems recognised the most important thing is the economy and jobs. Now they're talking about this electoral reform thing. It's not important, it's the wrong time, it's a waste of money. And we didn't give a strong sense, and again we failed to use their language. So when they said it's all about economy and jobs, right it is. And the voting system matters because the voting implies who has power to change our economy and who has power to create jobs and take. And we failed to do that. That's my view.
Thank you very much, everybody. I ended up there, but can I just say thank you to Daisy, and I'm sure they'll be around. Thank you.
Why don't you sit down and we'll put David on the end. Yeah, that's fine. Social anthropological title.
Yep. And I always bring some with me, just it's hopeless, so I can wear it.
Night. Oh, right.
So if he's not here, obviously in a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
The trains are the coolest place to be.
Yeah. Oh, right. Right. Is it possible to give me a wave when they all seem, when most of them seem to have arrived? Yeah, that's right. And then.
Yes. Yeah, Lib Dem colours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you try. I got an interesting question I had in mind, which I think links to some of what you're saying. I tried 3 times, twice during the Labour government and once during the coalition, to get a junior ministers together question, and I have deliberately undermined by the civil service. They were just prevented from meeting. Oh, sorry, Minister, you've got something else in your diary on that day. It was rendered, in course, particularly given the Blair Brown swift change. As soon as you'd actually got one group of people together who start talking, they'd moved. But even in the last government, and in this case trying to get long-term working pensions, Paul Burstow had been there for some time, and Treasury together, to talk about long-term care funding. The system was absolutely unable to enable to come together and just talk to each other and start thinking if there was a political consensus for the way forward.
Things I've said in here, and David Markland, so there's a series of conversations with the Labour Party and then with Democrats, and it's like in between. And we agreed that Westminster would be the last place to change. That in a sense that would be the tipping point. We change everything else. Westminster would go last. So we could bring leaders together to talk about it much more easily than we could bring ministers together.
And I mean, I tried. I was president of our regional party for a time, and I asked something to get our MPs. There's only 6 of them, and our people, 4 of them, and leaders of councils. Ask me on Monday. I'm getting results. I'm probably going on Monday. Good afternoon, everybody. As the susurrus conversation slowly dies away, we just had the final group arriving from the 3rd floor lift. We might have, I think this is perhaps the last. The last I heard, Stephen Knight, who was going to do the London elections at this stage, hadn't arrived. And from the fact that he isn't standing up and anywhere in the vicinity, I think we will then have to go straight forward into our session. I have made the rash step of having had conversations in advance, and we have therefore talked about a more or less coherent way of addressing this issue, to be undermined by the fact that we do what we agreed, and in any case you will all think that they should have been something else anyway. I've been to these events before, once or twice over the last 53 years. But throughout questions about linking other parties and other organisations, oddly, we have spent more time talking in relation to people in the party while gaining more senior people. 40-odd years ago, in a campaigning, themselves leaders of major national campaigning reprise of Tom's comment on this issue more widely in the context of looking forward to the forthcoming EU referendum, and we'll then go on to Sue, who will be talking more widely about a wider social movement and how we can a wider social movement which can attitudes as well as voting behaviour and create different sorts of society and a different sort of. So that's ambition, and I'm sure nobody will have 5 minutes to address those issues. But David,
Probably need a microphone.
a traditional element of your presentation.
But on the other hand, I noticed that last year, by the time it got to our session, all the bloggers and people had gone to sleep or gone home. So at the outside, hear what I said. But I've called wrong places, which is based on a remark of Joe Green in the 60s, when he said that the problem with British is that the divisions between the parties are in all the wrong places. Mm-hmm. Still the case today, but one of the things I'm going to say is it's very difficult to see it might change, that there are great difficulties in creating a progressive movement to win. Now, some of you know I'm now a fully fledged academic back in, so I will use the privilege of offering no solutions. and I'm hoping that will offer some. So if we could have them, is what are people's attitudes to immigration? Not attitudes towards immigration in favour of immigration. On the left-hand side, near the origin, against the cultural effects of immigration. And on the axis that goes in and out of the graph, a left measure by the state. And so as you go back further into the graph, people are more in favour of redistribution. So near to us, we're against redistribution. Into the graph is how many people are there in the electorate. But interestingly, they tend, there are a few of them on the right, there are in the centre, but the peak of immigration people left. The people who are very, very much in favour of redistribution, strongly in favour of redistribution, but also strong cultural effects of immigration. And then the other big peak is on the centre left, of people in favour of redistribution. So that's how the electorate divides up as a whole. And there's a big gap, which you can see in the graph. So, well, the next slide will tell you how Dems look on the same questions. Here are our voters, right? And this is based on the question, well, it's sorted for people who are more than 50% likely, or say they're more than 50% likely. So, terms, in the old canvassing terms, these are probs, right? And of course, our voters are almost exclusively in that second peak. They are voters who are open to the world, culturally liberal, but are left in terms of redistribution. And of course, what I was talking about last year was challenging the view that there are lots of people in the electorate who think. Those are the Lib Dems, but the interesting thing is the Labour Party.
So the Labour Party, you will see, looks pretty much like the electorate as a whole. Although it's got a left-wing peak and it's very sharp, as opposed to the electorate as a whole, which is kind of gently left-wing in that anti-immigration part of the elect, like us, and people who are left-wing but anti-immigration, right? And if you understand the Labour Party graph, that tells you everything you need to know about the difficulties they're having. They move one way, some candidates say move the other, and saying let's just because wherever we so that was the to show you. I just wanted to finally do the years, because this isn't new. We've tend to be better educated in the anti-immigration left-wing group, for example. And also, on the European Union, the tracking of the divide between those European and those anti-European. Those are... so what are the solutions to this? Well, one solution that was happening in 2010 was very clearly that the Labour Party was dying, that it couldn't solve this problem and was in a kind of permanent decline. And the one thing that the coalition did halted that decline. And so they've got a lot of people who are both more left-wing than that and people who are more authoritarian than that. And in fact, the Greens have precisely the problem that Labour electoral pact, but as you can see, the problem with that is that the issues that we have here are the top two issues in any election in recent years. Attitude towards wealth and income, and what is your attitude? If the agenda were different, then maybe an electoral pact politically to justify a political arrangement among parties whose views on important issues are so different or internally divided. Some people have suggested a new party, a new SDP, but the problem is meeting for the same ground. So finally, coming back to Grimond, there's the idea of the realignment of the left. The classic Grimondian idea that the leading left party, progressive party, really anchored in the left, and it shows itself as the representative of a particular class. Right? That's the Grimond realignment. I'm attracted to that idea. I've been attracted to that idea in the 70s. But as I said, right, and you know, explain your economic policy is very difficult with that range. US Democratic Party, we're talking about around 38%, 37, 38, 39, 40 coalition. And the real problem, the problem for the last 100 years, I persuade people on lowering
1910 answer, a simple one, which is that, well, you changed the electorate.
Yeah.
Like David, Tom Spencer has been active elected representative, and since then has had enough time to get honest again. He was an active member of the European Parliament, himself down the line of a conservative, or possibly even a conservative, and an interesting academic campaigning career as the background to what he is about to say.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start with an observation that Gordon made earlier. Not all Tories are the same. I know it's a cliche, but it's one that restating. And then I want to go back to the Victorian Liberal Party, in which my roots lie, because my grandmother had Gladstone at her christening. I'm sorry, can you...
Put the microphone closer.
Right, I'm sure Granny can hear me. My grandmother had Gladstone at her funeral, at her christening. Aha. Those of you who know Nottinghamshire know at least the test ground. The family were leather merchants, and she married a coal owner. And as the family became wealthier, it became less Baptist, became more Anglican. And eventually I asked my grandmother, why did the family change in 1910? And she said, very simple, darling. The Duke changed and the county went with him. But I was brought up with a grandfather who was a Liberal MP on one side and conservatives, solid conservatives on the other. I have regarded all my life as more immediate, in the one in the fighting the other bits of the Tory party, deeply unattractive and unattracted by liberalism. My grandmother's advice, for what it's worth, had destroyed the of my relatives, and chose instead to go to the European Parliament, which is where I spent 15 years, and in which you think about policy, a very social liberal thing to be doing. You think about policy rather than who do I need to team up in order to policy, because you have to knit your own majority at every final vote in the plenary. So I was as comfortable working with socialists in the European Parliament, or the Greens, who are by far of the political groups instead, or liberals, whether they're left liberals or policy. What was the listening to failed governments and then putting together the best compromise, a word not much practiced in UK politics, a compromise that produced a sensible solution at the end. So I'm afraid I'm myself up on rather greater length than Gordon let me earlier. I'm a Heathite Tory. I'm a federalist. I'm deeply suspicious of power. I'm deeply suspicious of the kind of secrecy that the state now demands. I'm socially liberal. And I cut my teeth in the Federation of Conservatives, where I and Andrew Neil got the same. The serious opponents were the Adam Smith Institute. So from Hamilton, who was, I think, standing as the czarist candidate at that particular stage. So I felt, I didn't feel any nervousness in accepting David come here this afternoon, because I think I've been fighting for liberalism with a small L all my life. Third point, the decision to, the Tory party is an odd mixture of fractured party, traditional country party, which is where liberals go to die. It's just that kind of comfort being in the shires, which made it so easy for the Conservative Party to join the European People's Party and to feel comfortable in that gathering. Let me more points, if I may. Danny Finkelstein, a man who worked in many parties, wrote a rather good piece in the Times last week, arguing that continuing educational levels were going to university. I mean, when I was at university, there was 7% of the population there. It's now, what is it, approaching 50. It requires, it constantly stokes a kind of central body of, quote, liberal, progressive, educated people. But the two traditional parties, Commission, the Conservatives and the Labour Party, have to have a group coming on stream. That's why arguments such as gay marriage, I don't think were an accident. I think they were deliberately part of trying to say, look, hey, we're still open. You come join us. There are bits in our elements, and you see the same thing. My concern, as a supporter of proportional representation, from the very early ages, from the alternation of a Liberal Party, which meant you had constant liberal ideas. The other part of that coalition attacking the Liberal. So I don't think that you want on a progressive majority to the left, which is why I was delighted by the coalition, because it meant that the coalition had come first to the right. But if you want liberalism with a small l built into a structure of society, you alternate between coalitions to the left. I am, of course, one of the few people who doesn't have Alzheimer's who can remember 1975 referendum campaign. I think the youngest person. Yeah, but you must have been in nappies.
The new Tom.
Go on. Well, I was 7 and I was hired as a 20 to write the minutes for the Britain in Europe campaign. A stunning job to be doing, and I'm going to tell one anecdote which has nothing to do with this story at all, other than I looked it up in my notes of the minutes before I came here. We closed the meeting with Roy Jenkins from the chair saying, right then, I'll sort the BBC and you, Willie, can sort the Church of England. Campaign. Cross-party meetings were the norm. We knew each other, we talked to each other, other's parties, we slept with each other. Now you don't supporting Britain's membership of the European Union. We did it on an all-party basis, and that made it easier to absorb the CBI, TUC doing one thing, and Sportsmen for Europe, and all the other idiotic exercises we dreamt up. We're not in that situation now. We're in a situation where Wilson, this is a referendum to solve a political problem, but he's much more ambitious than Mr. Wilson. Like, he's doing his negotiation at the same time as he does his campaign. He doesn't know where he's going to end. There is a very high possibility, in my view, and you should take when you consider working with other political parties, that the Tory party will not survive a referendum. Either not survive the first referendum, or not survive the continued aggression that comes from the never-endum, for which we are grateful to the Scots, that, you know, but you still think, well, we'll come back and we'll be back in 5 years. This issue tore the Labour Party apart, and I remember being thinking, God, we better, there's going to be for those who are not privy to the agonies of the Tory party to want to score. I hope.
Thank you, young Tom. by 4.5 months, I note from a quick glance at Wikipedia. Just as a suggestion to people, if you'd like to follow up some of the intellectual ideas that were behind Tom's ideas about both and the ideas in some of the journalists who therefore write clearly and well, there are many elements of the thesis which I think some of us agree with, but as a broad approach to some of these areas about the balance around parts of the Conservative Party, not those which don't called the sour Conservatives, but others, there are ideas about collapse there, which brings me very naturally to Sue Goss, who is looking at the result. I think that most of us move in the position to be thinking more broadly about
Social Liberal Forum. I suppose I've been a Labour Party member. I guess feels more open. For most of us, it's a sense of outrage about something. They're selling off the school playing fields, and we get a feeling of excitement about new ideas. We like it when we learn something new. But at the same time, a sense of worth from the solidarity with our comrades as we do. There's a sort of huddling, is there not, in terms of coming to a political conference with one's... And it's the imperatives that make politics one of the most human of endeavours. It's the imperative towards tribe and solidarity which sort of draws the warmth, but the uniquely human characteristics we discovery and stretches ourselves and tests. And I think these two forces, and exploration, are what moves us away from the politics, which is really, you know, reptilian stem, and towards a space which makes us fully human. It's hope. If anybody wants one, trying to capture this idea, asking if we could politics that wins our tribal solidarity while expressing the discomfort of discomfort, learning that our assumptions are wrong. Some of the assumptions that David is challenging with. The world is more complex than we thought, that the ordered our way of understanding the world doesn't work anymore. that sort of positivist in the election campaign experience, the public telling clear that political class has abandoned them, that nobody's right, then what is it? It's that voyage of discovery, and it's about exploring difference. I was never prouder of Compass than we had a conference just the week, which was a pretty sad event, I guess, and timing. And it was an open how we didn't understand the language we used was all rubbish. And a couple of interventions, he said that he voted UKIP. And around me, all in the Compass conference, an intern said, us linked to lecture halls, clubs, in conversation with the unions, bringing in enlightened reform legislation. The Labour Committee in 1906 was just an electoral pact between the ILP, the CP, although it's to adapt. So for me, party win elections, that seems to me to be a second. Most interesting is how we think about what political parties are for. They may say, I am a this dumbed down, instead of policy developed by expert civil servants over the last couple of years, we've started to treat policies as products designed by spin doctors, with focus groups and sold with a carefully marketing patter which all politicians have to repeat. Market tricks such as pledge cards are adopted to strengthen the customer market, in which political brands try to attract votes through clever packaging of almost identical political work. The party are no longer home in discussion or derived from the values and logic of a wider set of social institutions. It becomes impossible to guess which policies each party stands for, so indistinguishable become. Policies become kept under wraps and launched with all the flummery of launching a new Apple product. Reveal at party. Now, in terms of doing politics, this is because ideas are not products. They need to be thought through. They need to be explored. And if we don't know until they get revealed at conference, we have no chance of they might mean in the modern world. And in policy, they are primarily different balancing judgments between values. Labour and the Lib Dems both believe in social justice. Possibly the Lib Dems are likely to prioritise civil liberties over justice. Possibly the Labour Party might do it the other way round. Actually, will probably sustainability will trump growth. Wouldn't you guys probably hope it doesn't come? But yet we behave to each other. And so we shaft each other, we write lies in election leaflets, and we say things on the doorsteps in order to scrape a few votes here and there. Which politics is done. Away from gains to see that longer term tradition of politics, and then over again, and that can be made. This isn't about agreeing, or at least it's not yet about agreeing. It's agreeing each other and exploring differences. And I think our political solutions have become dangerous, ridiculously constrained into a very, very trivial set of when actually the range within which we could solve some of the problems is drawing our attention to is much wider. And as Tom's recognising, it's about bringing the British people with us to a real other ways to address our problems. Now a range of things that happen in Westminster, and that will take creative, not sound bites. So some of this is about the spaces in which we do politics. You have always as a political space and recognising its value as against other parties are beginning now to vaguely get it. We'll see how long that lasts. There's something also in the nature of our political. I know in Compass we're doing a lot of open space, World Cafe, events in which we listen, not talk, trying to move away from I'm sitting on a platform, but you know what I mean, doing politics in different ways, festivals involving music and as well as just politics. Because it seems to me there are there's three big opening up in which if we collaborate, we're in danger of losing elements of the political process. One of them is referendum and, you know, that generation. The second one is a settlement with Scotland and a constitutional convention and how we the balance of powers across these islands. And the third is electoral reform. We cannot have a 6, 7, 8 first past the post without it beginning to degrade our democracy completely. So these are all areas where we nature of it. To me, there is a deeper prize, which is about changing the British public's perception about what politics could be like and what it could mean, how politicians might behave, a political education process that challenges the juvenile Prime Minister's questions, win-lose, you know, the Paxman interview, into something that makes it possible for a senior politician. I don't know. It's complicated. It's really difficult. What do you do? Rather than having always staying with which now every possibility of the status quo is considered unrealistic. I mean, if the rather slight vague changes of policy that Labour carved onto a piece of stone are radicalism, God help us. Somehow, you know, we've got to the point where corporates to pay low legal taxes has been redefined as bullshit. We've got to the point where, you know, worrying the state reads our emails has become unpatriotic. Civil society, charities, to begin to redefine a sort of politics for the 21st century that law, well, how come through that? So can we do it together? Can we work across boundaries while not agreeing? It doesn't mean, I think, that we have to agree. We just have to sit with us. I'm working in my day job in Belfast at the moment, City of Belfast.
Thank you, Sue. I think we have one round of questions, and the first 4 hands to be raised were, look for a moment, you're number 1, number 2 behind, sorry David, not you, behind, you're number 3, and hello, no, it's number 4. That's which I saw your hands. Go on.
Thank you. Question, really, the chart you showed about the whole electorate seemed to show there were almost no votes for anybody on the right and centre right of politics. Don't all your charts need to be kind of the fact that the Conservatives somehow managed to win enough votes to win an election?
Got a question, doing one of her an article about Lib Dems. Only to find rambling, yes, Lib Dems rambling, as always, and I am now. But only to find out at the end of the article, oh, party. And it just showed how we actually are, and particularly actually in that case.
I did say it was a Labour Party group at the beginning of the piece. What makes sense?
I want to say work together with the one. We say that to be at the heart of Europe. Heart of Europe, if we're not of the Eurozone, won't we be left? Secondly, with Boris to stop Heathrow expansion. Can we work with UKIP, everything, to stop having first election?
Yeah. 2, 3, 4. Yes, the young gentleman in the front.
Thank you kindly. Commentators are fond of saying that liberalism thrives when it is championed from within the other two big parties, and that a liberal party is not necessarily required. Tom, you contemplated the death of the Tory party in light of a European result. It was easy for us to party that supports and promotes and champions liberalism needed, or are champions of these values parties? They're two of the same thing.
Right, we'll try and be very quick just to see if we can fit in one question after that. David, there was one specific question for you, and if you want to, please.
Okay.
We'll do it in the same way.
Well, facts. Right? The electorate is centre-left, folks. Get over it, those on the right. Because it captures the whole of a great chunk of the centre and little bits the left as well. Do that? Well, how does it do that? It does it because it has a reputation for competence. Right? So, because politics isn't just about values, it's also about competence and trust. And you put them together and you just see just the Conservatives are at winning elections that is basically against them.
Only someone who's never been inside the Conservative Party could regard competent. I still think that that's where economic sanity lies. I want to just, so I'm going to put it in quite improperly. No one's mentioned climate change is going to affect every single one of us through our lives, through our grandchildren's lives, and yet it didn't feature in the election campaign. Yet we have managed to preserve an all-party approach to it. So there is hope that when something, which takes me to the final point down here, Liberal Party, Liberal Democrat Party, what you need of liberalism with a small L. You need to build it into the system. You need to regard it, because that is the essence, that mixture of tolerance, of, I'm going to the word of Englishness, is actually what its chance to govern when other people make mistakes. You have to, your ambitions, if I might say so, are too small.
And I think the Conservative Party are just very clever at defining what they do as competent.
That's true.
Because actually the omni-shambles, probably the economy happened, has been, there's something about how we just reframe what competence looks like, which is a values question. Within the Labour Party, within the Conservative Party, there is a big authoritarian, libertarian spectrum, and in both parties, obviously, there is a libertarian tradition. What's important, I guess, is that that is not the loudest voice of these two parties. Although there are strong libertarian traditions, I mean, there's a strong libertarian tradition inside the Labour Party fighting for gay, fighting for women's rights, fighting for, you know, when nobody else much, the Liberal Democrats. Now it's become mainstream, everybody's forgotten. It's a major part of political struggle. But those liberal ends of the spectrum to be the noisiest. So where liberalism and Democrats, seem to me, are really important to British politics is in your ability to espouse values and do that as a primary objective rather than as a secondary objective. And that sort of got lost in the coalition.
We've reached the end of our time, although I have two further important things to say. If we run on any further, Mary sitting on the front will frown at me, and I'm much too frightened to allow that to happen. Can I, rising corner of South East London, hear a little about the forthcoming London? I gather that Stephen is now and able to give us 5 minutes on the subject. Heard.
Oh, you can hear me. Good. First of all, can I apologise for late getting here at the session than at the beginning of the session, and I shall try not to keep you from your refreshment break for more than a few minutes. I wanted to say a few words because the London elections next year, as well as elections, but actually the Scottish elections next year, less. We've had, in London, like all parts, I don't need to tell her, we've gone for a final place on a PRC. And in fact, it would have gone to UKIP had UKIP passed the 5% threshold, and they only got 4.97%. So I'm certainly hoping that UKIP don't have a revival in London. Thankfully, London is not generally a UKIP city. We have the lowest UKIP vote, I think, of any region of the UK in London. Certainly any region of England, I think, and that is really a reflection of the fact we are an early, and we've got social liberal group of the two of us, with a distinctly progressive agenda, and that's partly because when you're trying to run an of 8 million plus population, you need to have a housing system that doesn't cost £1 million to house the average family, which is what we have at the moment. So there are all sorts of solutions where you need a strong and distinctly progressive state acting ways to solve the problems. We are going to focus in the London elections next year on the affordability of housing in the city, where the cost of a home has gone. In 1997, the average home in London could be bought times the average salary. The equivalent figure now is 4 times and rising. And the idea that anybody in London gets on the so-called housing ladder is now an impossibility. It's been locked out of generations to come, and until anybody does something about the cost of housing, then London isn't going to function as a city. We have in particular a very high number of women are locked out of the labour market through the high cost of childcare, and the labour market in London does not give the flexibility because of the long commutes and the for many people to meet parental responsibility. And we've got a problem with the lowest maternal employment rates of any region in the UK. We've got really genuine equality issues we're going to be campaigning on. We're all strong on the environment. It's very poor. We've got 10,000 Londoners a year dying prematurely because of poor air quality, rate of strokes and heart attacks predominantly in London than we should have. We've had a unanimous position on the London Assembly last years of everybody, and longer than that, everybody, all parties against Heathrow. Now apparently, although if you talk to Assembly members, they don't think that, and some of the mayoral capital city of the United Kingdom, so very much with a global economy and a global outlook to the city, and their membership of the EU on the right side of, and I think we've got a really strong progressive agenda, and one which is distinctly liberal at the same time. Redefine the liberal this election. And it is important, not just in London politics terms, but I think it's important nationally. The national media are all based in London, and they will report the mayoral race as a national event. And we've seen this time and time. The mayoral candidates will be reported way. So I think we've got important. I hope everyone who can be will be involved. I know a number of London. But I think if you live anecdote, one bit of hope for us all. I was agent in a by-election on Thursday in the safest Conservative ward in the Twickenham, one that had been conservative for 15 years. It's a ward fought properly for 12 years, and it was led by the Conservative councillor who beat Vince Cable in the Twickenham seat, and therefore resigned her council seat. We achieved on Thursday a 21% swing to win that seat. To win that seat in just 3 weeks. We had just 3 weeks to campaign. We had 3 weeks putting our brains forward, and we had a very large number of new members. And I saw an email on the afternoon of the from our membership secretary saying another new member in your area, a neighbouring ward to the school in the ward, had just joined the party. And I phoned her up because I knew her vaguely. Dean, I know you've just joined the Liberal Democrats. But we've got this by-election, and is there any chance that you might be willing to stand as a candidate? And she said, oh, that's interesting. I'm sort of interested. Could I have a couple of days to think about it, talk to my family? And I said, no. Election meeting starts in an hour. Can you be there? And she said, well, I'm currently on a bus. I'm on my way to a training event in the neighbouring borough, in Surbiton. And I said, well, can you get off the bus? And she said, oh, well, we did our very, very best, and against all the odds, we won it. And I think it's the first by-election
Fourth prize, the chocolate, dark chocolate, goes to ticket number 139. Prize goes to number 36. Second, number 78. And first prize, wine. I think that's a content rather than instruction. To number 24. So numbers 24, 78, 36. Yes, right. But it is very...
Okay, my pleasure, thank you. Thank you.
privilege to be in the chair for this. Many of you will probably have been to some of the other hustings. I actually haven't. I think probably have. And I'll probably be a bit bored of doing it by now. So we're going to try and make it left hustings. So I will feed a few of those in to make it active. And also for everybody here, things. Both candidates is going to speak first. So I'm going to allow the person who most quickly answers the following question whether they wish to go first. Ready? Which former special advisor to Nick Clegg, 2 years before they were, to comment piece in The Guardian suggesting that social liberals should go and join Labour. Yay!
And he was wrong.
Yay!
This is something we should be proud of, and it will be very many, I'm quite sure. Before you make, many of you will have made your, I respect that entirely, but before those of you who haven't made a decision do so, by the and then as a new MP, it was around the time, so I challenged him under freedom, and we actually ended up export license. Completely life. It can lead to a life with difficult relationships. And we know that can rescue the individual and give them the chance, and yet no such right. So I'm really proud of the fact that in April we introduced the first ever waiting time standards. Waiting time standard for early intervention in psychosis, something that Liberals achieved in government, and we should hold our heads high because we achieved that. And I found in so much that I did as a minister, people who were as second let down by the system, ignored, particularly powerful citizens against sometimes an over. We must seek to combat those wherever we see them. And then there is the principle that every child in our country should have the same right to achieve of their talents, to flourish, to protect it and enhance it. And then along there is the principle, and I don't think we always talk about it enough, that to unite people, not to divide them. These are the household names, are here one day, gone the next completely. New startups emerge, catch fire, because there's a ready market out there. And in a way I want us to see ourselves, to think that we can get, because to achieve real, and we know we can achieve change in ways, in the campaigning we do, in our community, and in Parliament. But to achieve, we have to aspire to be in government as Liberal Democrats, in our own live out our liberal values. It is sure that we're fighting for. These are the changes that I think we need to make. And does it make sense? I just pose this question. To have an expensive party headquarters when as a campaigning party we should be committing our resources on the ground around our country. I just raised that. The second condition precedent for our succeeding is that we liberal think of campaigning alone. We have to be able to inspire people, inspire our activists and inspire all of those people out there who share our but who don't necessarily know us. Finally, if we are to become a party of the future, we have to shore up a new generation of young people. In the 60s, used to attend young Liberal conferences. Some of you may even have been at them. Yeah, I can see from the laughter that's true. But it inspired people. The activists, the councillors, they cases the members of Parliament. We have to start that new thinking all over again. We can't run on empty. And if we inspire a new generation of young people who are fundamentally liberal, attitudes in there, they believe in opportunity for all. They believe in radical reform, ridiculous antiquated drugs laws which criminalise young people, millions of pounds into the hands of criminals. What an outrageous public policy that has been over so long. And they believe in radical crime. So if we can get that new generation to our cause, we can become a party of the future. And let me just end by saying this to you. To her about my work on mental health, and particularly relating to young people. And she herself has suffered from mental health. And she said to me something that meant a lot to me. She said, "You have restored my faith in politics." And because my whole purpose is to make a difference to people's lives. That's what we are all about. There's no purpose in us. Make a difference to people, progressive movement of change, and we can again aspire.
Because they say that politicians like the sound of their own voices. I am the sound of mine. Can I to you, 25 years of Tory rule, and thank you, and my eldest daughter, who was then in her teens, was in those in our village does in their teens, rite of passage, working. And she came back working in Spa on the Saturday evening after the election, and she was uncharacteristically buzzing and positive. And she is now, but she was 14, 15. And she said, "Where's the effect?" Really excited. This is so exciting. Everybody's talking about it. It's brilliant. And I was really touched. The following week for the first time, and then on the Saturday, as he comes back, and, I said, "Is everybody still talking about it?" She goes, "Last week." Get over yourself. And the point is, that second Saturday just ended 95 years of rule the Saturday before, but the conversation. And I just observed now, and I'm pleased I'm not in the Labour Party. One is do this until September. Second is it's much less clear why they lost. There's also ideological explanations as to what happened to them. So, I mean, you may have all time of austerity. Wealth from the rich to the poor, therefore you oppose tooth and nail plans to give a tax cut to millionaires through the inheritance tax changes this week. We are the kind of people, similar, that I was able to give and I as a consequence. And I want us today to look at what we're up against and realise maybe the nomenclature of those evils has changed. Things have moved on, of course they have. But what Beveridge did was think big, because the problems are absolutely huge. They are even greater than the challenges that face the Liberal Democrats. And we as a society need to grapple with those. So what are today's giant evils? Well, they will perhaps be many-fold, but I'm just going to three, if you will. The first has got to be a housing crisis to tackle it. We have got a region of a backlog over the next 10 years of 3 million homes, 2 3/4 of which need to be affordable homes. And yet we have a Tory government determined to sell off housing association properties. That crisis will get worse. And we talk about aspiration. We know that unless the Labour Party Corbyn as their leader, the chances are the Labour Party will sit on the fence when it comes to the housing association buy-off. So they will want the aspirational voters in the lab con. What? We're on the side of the aspirational 2 million people rotting on a council house waiting list. That's on whose side we will stand. We have a massive, massive problem. The 3 million homes need to be built in 10 years. Climate change. You don't need existential threats to the. How about existential threat? Full stop. And we face an enormous challenge, not least to move people from one place to another so that they will climate change matter. Talk to people in a way which will help them to understand it's not a matter just for those climate change. You're worried about Britain's place in the world. Petrified about our ineffective countries. They are weaker countries. So I was brought up north of this place, in a place called Preston, and I had a very happy childhood. I want to just point that out before I say all this. Up by my mum, a single mum, who brought up me and my little sister, and we were brought up in some poverty. And you don't realise the mark of a brilliant. You have no idea how poor you were until many years later on. I remember washing up with my mum the evening after my grandmother's funeral, and we discussed the fact, that my grandmother's wedding ring had been melted into my great-grandmother's. And I just think, whatever happened to your wedding ring? And she said, I pawned it.
7 to feed you. You think, crumbs. I grew up. And I don't feel angry about that for myself. But I do think, hang about, how did I emerge from that with you lot? But liberal sense. Because, look, inequality is not just immoral, it is utterly, utterly. It is a waste of the talents, the people, and identify big solutions to big problems. When it comes to how to build 300,000 homes a year, and you can do that by a whole range of reasons, a whole range of mechanisms, not least is changing the Treasury rules to allow housing associations to borrow against the value of their own. Do nearly a third of that like that just by changing those rules, making sure that government identifies lands and builds. That only 1.5% of Britain is developed. Don't buy this UKIP nonsense that we are a crowded island. There is space for our people. We need to build space for people. So we need to then look at climate change. We are not going to win against the existential threat of climate if all we do is offer people hair, shirt and austerity, green, tidal and hydro. Let's go for it and create. Let us inspire people in thinking that being green mean being richer. Inequality between regions. Well, first of all, let's make sure that we bring in a living wage, and let's make sure we do it and understand that this is not. We could save something like £10 billion a year reploughing benefits into making that people are paid decent wages. What are we doing? Supplement the green infrastructure. You make sure we can as a country so that we're not just centred everything on, but not making use of all the United Kingdom. We made better use of rail services by H4, 5, making sure there is a northern powerhouse for pity's sake, and ensuring that we do 15 megabits per second, the average speed in the United Kingdom. Estonia is on 40 megabits per second. Next year, South Korea will be on 1,000 megabits per second. Let us, through a universal service obligation, ensure we have at least 100 megabits per second for invest, to borrow. So I would set up an Office of Capital Expenditure on the same standing of the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, and the whole object of that would be to ensure that every penny that we borrow to build all those projects I've just talked about is tax efficient, tax returns, that it creates the multiplier effect that we all believe that it will. It is absolutely possible, economically credible, but utterly, utterly ambitious. War, there have been 2 consensuses. The first by William Beveridge, that we are. The second, I'm afraid, under Margaret Thatcher. All parties have found themselves underneath that umbrella to some degree, and we must end that. We must end that. We must recognise that there is room now for a third consensus if we're not careful. Be the fractured consensus of grievance and nationalism. We instead have got to be government equals weak citizens, that we instead believe that a community led by a government that cares for the well-being of everyone, not coming from when he made those remarks and he wrote his report. He was an MP 1 single year in the 1940s, belonging to a party weaker still than the one we are in today. He had the to look beyond what was possible and to fight for what was necessary. That is your historic role.
Give time for clapping at the end. Very limited time for questions, so we will Twitter, so if the rest of you can think of your questions and get your hands ready to shoot up. Question on Twitter that came from come 2020, how will you argue against the vote Tory or your Labour government? How will you argue against the vote Tory or you'll get a Labour SNP government? Okay, where I can see them. Okay, so there is a lady at the... I'll take the lady with the blonde bob here, Anna, a couple of rows back, and I need somebody from this side who's got their hand right up. I'm in all women shortlist, actually. I'm going to take this lady in the purple jacket. If you could say your name, and so it's Catherine. Have you got a mic?
Hi, thank you. My name's Catherine. In 2013, I gave my first ever speech to the Glasgow conference in favour of the 2 SLF amendments to the economy motion. Not only did both candidates vote against the amendments, but Tim actually spoke against them in summation. To hear more from both, regret backing the economic sort of direction of the leadership and what you would do differently.
So, yeah, lady here.
My question is, what will you do to hold the government to account to stop vulnerable people the cracks between our broken and disjointed public services?
And it's Marisha that's... Yeah. Oh. We're going to get fit today.
Hi, Marisha Ray. This is economics directly, but it's to do with the wider involvement in politics of a wider range of people. To reform the party's practices and procedures to make it easier for newer members and for a broader range of people who are outside the party at the moment to get involved right to the heart.
The vote Tory or you'll get Labour SNP. Catherine's question about whether we got it wrong on the economy. And Anna's question on holding the government, particularly on public services, and Marisha on helping new members access getting involved in the party by reforming our practices. Other questions?
Okay. To Quiet Miracle, over Twitter. We had nothing to say in that tide of either the SNP surge or indeed the Tory anti-SNP surge. Can I just say, though, who are very comfortable, being clear of who we are and who we're for is very, very important. We also need to understand on May the 7th. It took me a little while to actually be able to look at the figures because they're so utterly, unspeakably horrible following May the 7th. But when I did, it occurred to me what happened hadn't quite happened. The thought that we lost all those seats because of a fear of a weak magged by a strong sturgeon was not the full story. The average, if you can call it that, picture across the seats we lost to the Tories was that the Tory vote would go up by a couple of thousand and our vote would go down about. And what happened was, yes, there was some exchange. There was a far greater leakage from us and the Greens and even UKIP. And actually having a sense that we were on the side of those people who felt the Tories were against them. Absolutely critical. Had that been the case, we would have saved probably, I mean statistically, we'd have saved around 20 seats. I think we should not worry too much about them repeating the same thing again. We should instead worry, and Nicola Sturgeon acted in playing to people's emotions. And much as I detest nationalism, I absolutely admire the fact that the border was one of populist hope. And I'm a sucker for hope, me. And I want to make sure deliver is about hope. People from one place. Distilled messages that moves people. The question about SLF amendments and courts on the leadership from an embarrassing defeat, being entirely honest with you. If and when I'm leader, I won't put you in that position very often. I consider what's the wisest thing to do. And but my view is, should we say, the Vince Cable answers would include social care, and we would not be taking care of all to go. If we're going to be bold, you do realise, don't you, that what we're going to be saying to the electorate is if you want dignity from cradle to grave, and Marisha, I mean, to all that, but I think there are a whole bunch of local parties that have just tripled in size and do not know what to do with all these folks. And the danger is you'll have, half a dozen people, possibly gentlemen, possibly even older gentlemen, who knows, who are on the executive, who are in the most don't know what to do, want to climb onto power such as it is anyway. So our job, I think, in operate infrastructure as a party is to spend quite existing members, and that means our staff will be outward looking from HQ in the regions, developing the membership experience, my experience.
This is going to be completely critical. In the next 5 years, they have no one else to blame. They had us to blame last time, and they will have this. They have the extraordinary challenge of keeping them together over the European. I think it will be proved to be a task that's impossible for them to achieve. They are planning currently £12 billion of welfare cuts to some of the most vulnerable people in our society. This will affect disabled who suffer from mental illness, families very low incomes, those so-called hard-working families that the Conservatives often talk about, well, they're just about to receive a cut in their income from the Conservatives as a result of their plan to cut tax. So, and then there is the Anna, our crisis. Of funding is just enormous. They reckon that by 2020 we will have to be spending about £30 billion extra a year. There was this claim that you could £7 billion in social care, and no one's challenge for the Tories to undertake. And my very firm view, both Anna and Quiet Miracle, is that progressives, liberal progressives, come up with our to this massive challenge, both of how we have a modern welfare state which is sustainable and how we protect completely critical services. And we've got to really between those people who believe fundamentally in the Beveridge settlement from the late 40s now. But we as progressives need to update, need to come up with progressive solutions to take the Tories on so that we are on the front foot, not just saying no, but front foot with solutions for how we ensure that we maintain vital services and how we maintain our welfare state. Because we have to be on the side of decency and of protecting vulnerable people and of leading people out of poverty, not consigning them to even greater poverty, which the Conservatives plan to do. And Anna, there are so many cases of vulnerable people being failed services. I saw so many people who were suffering mental illness and got the benefit system, a complete failure of joined up government. So there is a massive task to be done in modernising the way in which we do government to protect the most people in our society. Catherine, on the economy. I had the honour of become a visiting fellow of Knowledge. It's a scheme to bring stupid not to be in this period of historic low interest rates to be investing in our infrastructure. And it just strikes me that as a party we have to reject the Osborne orthodoxy now and to be clear, turn to our values and making the case for investment in our rail infrastructure, in our broadband infrastructure. We have the worst insulated housing stock in the whole of Europe. Let's, instead of the next tax cut, spend billions of pounds on insulating every home in our country. Every family gets a cut in their energy bill. Massive amounts of carbon at the same time. We should be using this moment of historic low interest rates to be making necessary investment. And then Marisha. I do this in my opening remarks, that our party is not, if we're honest, fit for purpose at the moment. If we are to become a really effective machine, and if we're to ensure that every person in our party, whether it's based on gender, whether it's their ethnic origins, disability, has the chance to make the most of feeling involved, every member being engaged in policy, we've got to change the way we operate. Because if we're honest with ourselves, quite often new members join and feel completely neglected. And if we're honest with ourselves again, the structure of our party is so complex. I don't understand all the committees in our party. I don't understand how people are elected to them all. And accountability means so that people understand where power lies in our party. I'm afraid that it is a conditioned precedent for us succeeding as a modern democratic party that we overhaul the way we operate.
Catherine, do you want a supplementary? Yes, so if go back to Catherine.
We accepted the orthodoxy of the deficit reduction without making a sensible distinction between current spending and capital. And I tried to make that point in the lesson that I learned from speaking to Stephanie Flanders. And that, to me, is the lesson we have to learn now.
Anna, Marisha, no, you.
Thanks for your response. You've both mentioned the issue of cost. Sort of, Tim, you suggested it'll cost more to care, and Norman, clearly we've got a funding crisis. My challenge would be more to sort out some of those problems? And what if, actually, if we took a whole system view, it might be cheaper for the public sector if
entrenched and then to cure them. Good at then keep dysfunctional system that it works in silos. And I think both with joining up, but critically also localizing. You know, we have a system. Have a look at. We've written a book, which is available online. It's published a couple of days ago, which talks about that. So empowering communities with, and incidentally, in Sweden, most people don't pay income tax. They pay local income tax on services that are paid for locally, and having tax raising and service provision at the same achieves a real accountability and gets away from what I just control over their destiny. But joining things up locally, I think you can have much more effective use of them.
Tim. Right, just quickly, I mean, I think, Anna, first of all, I think there is some evidence that doing things in a more progressive way will save money, and I'm convinced that the living wage, for example, only stands to reason. Quite a lot of research to demonstrate that. On health and social care, we'll wait and see. All I'm saying is that if you're going to lift social care standards, and that becomes part of the National Health Service, that will mean more investment in care. Now, it may be by joining things up, by doing bed blocking, by making sure that we have integrated pathways, that we can, and I really hope that is the case. And that I hope that's the end of inquiries. I don't think it will. I think it will cost more money. We are doing social care in this country by to people who saved a little having to spend, people who've saved nothing and haven't had the so being given appalling services very often, really lovely, wonderful people working in the sector and being paid graceful wages for doing it. Absolutely could be working and earning in a supermarket. Those things are not right, and I think, I strongly suspect that if we are going to address this, because social care is an issue for most of us towards a long time, often you don't think, even when you get it still seems blooming ages off, and it's getting closer by the day. But the point is, that's why we as a society are quite good at putting it off. I think most people, dignity from cradle to grave, and the certainty of it not costing.
That question very snappy, and I will ask. Thank you, Marisha.
How will party? What's your vision of the party about?
Thank you. So, Norman, if you could, it's under a minute, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I think it has to be an urgent priority. If I'm elected leader, this is have to confront positive action. It's difficult for some Liberals, but I believe positive action. If in a society or an organisation, people are held back through a which prevents them from achieving what suggests they're capable of achieving, then confront that because society or organisation does not operate in
Okay, I mean, first of all, the same decision and I've spoken to lots of them for very similar reasons, at the same time without anybody formally asking them. That is efferent balance, and the ethnicity I'm not, but I don't think balance there either. But so undoubtedly, the balance of our party at the top and in elected positions and in executive up and down the country is extraordinarily poor. We're incredibly pale, and you've got to do two things, I think. The first is do some positive action, as Norman rightly says, and do some quick wins. So look, 8 MPs, all white around the United Kingdom, and I can guarantee that I will pick 20 spokespeople, at least half of whom, at least 10 or 15 are BAME. Just to set an example, but otherwise, there are things to do in terms of direct mechanisms of action. I want to just tell you that culture needs to change. And the difficulty is, and I've noticed this, I've been a PPS to one leader and one acting leader, and it was a great experience, but one thing that occurred to me is that there are follow leaders around, and the same in the night, but they're all the same, and you've got to make
hell let loose. So how do we get, when we build up again, how do we ensure that
compromise through coalition, but some of which, brackets bedroom tax, or insert whichever one you wish, were a positive choice by members of the. How do you win back the trust of the electorate that we will deliver?
I'm the co-author of University study into cash for peerages, which found evidence across all three parties of peerages having been sold in the last decade. And I'm very sorry to say it, but to elevating big donors to the House of Lords, our party, what do you propose to do about what do you propose to do to stamp out cash for peerages?
Thank you. Okay. She took some positive actions to back that Brocard has a three-parter on cash for peerages. One, do you recognise the gravity of those peerages? Two, what are you going to do with peers who take our whip, who bought their peerage, or to do about it in the future? Okay. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah. So, question. I mean, for what it's worth, and in my mind what I think success looks like, and I think the first thing to say is that we are in exit. We are. To make people feel exhilarated at the teams through the team. That's got to be pretty much the trajectory where we are. This room joined the party as a career move, but I also hope nobody joined as a cop. We joined the long in power. The critical thing for us, and lessons learnt, is that we must never go into an electoral arrangement with another party again unless delivery of proportional representation in the first 12 months is the red line. For our survival, for the country's sake. Pratik, so when I'm with my kids and we're not out playing footy and walking and running and things, I watch terrible movies with them. I mean, genuinely good ones that I would choose to watch. I end up watching Independence Day and things like that, and I watched it for the 29th time the other week. And of course, if you've ever seen it, the only good bits are nicked off War of the Worlds, and the rest of it's terrible. But the main thing is the Americans, of course, all the best weapons they could possibly find at the alien spaceships, and they even make a mark on them. They just bounce pounds into green energy. They all just bounced off. The lack of trust. And nobody heard. People's fingers were in their ears. Trust build and seconds to lose. And without going into the details of what happened in the past, in the last 5 years, we need to get that back. It's decide that we are terrible. If 20% we have succeeded. And so it's those kind of things where we demonstrate the sense of having bold thing in the eyes of the electorate. Question. I mean, do I recognise the gravity of the situation? What little credibility the change is undermined by the knowledge there are people in there who people feel are only in there because they gave money to the party and to many other parties as well. So I recognise it's a huge problem for trust in politics and a huge for the sense of legitimacy of that chamber. And for what it's worth, this next we're going to have to make good use of the House of Lords. We defend against some terrible things that the Tories are going to do. English votes for English, our group of peers, to be illegitimate and not have the finger pointed back at them saying that you are illegitimate. It's important that we clean things up.
Well, first of all, Richard, what we all do this for, year after year, is to try to make a difference to people's lives. That must be ultimately what we're about. And you can do that, actually. I was talking to Martin Todd about this today, and he nicely to me that you can make it in all sorts of ways. By being in government. You could, of course, by taking control of councils and changing the way in which power is operating at a local level. Power to people, to communities, not doing things to people, which is what other parties tend to. But we must also, of course, aspire to be in government ourselves so that we can apply liberal principles to the government of this country. And I just to you that I think we are in a fact of the referendum on Europe in itself could fracture, and we have in a state of grace as a party ready to take advantage and to build this sense of a massive radical movement of change and to bring people in from beyond the party as well who are on that journey with us. Pratik, at the end of the day, you achieve nothing if you lose trust to us. And so there is an absolute need for the party as a whole and the leader to build again a new trust with the British people. And we have to face up to the last 5 years, well, also the good things that we did, and recognize publicly and identify and demonstrate a lesson from it. But I think then beyond, it is about speaking about things that to our values. So if I win, experience mental ill health, will be a complete mission of mine. And I know from the time as a minister that if you pursue it, well, so many of their fellow citizens have been and had their careers blighted by so much money put into the hands of international criminal networks. So us being out there and clear about the need to make these reforms, because it is an injustice that. It's a failed public policy and an injustice. So many people in our prisons because of drug-related offences. So let's just take issues, and I think in that way you build a new connection with people and you can convince people that you have given substantial sums of money to political parties. And I take the point direct at this party as well. Neither Tim or myself have been involved in the selection, and we can't make judgments about those who are in there. What we can do and what we must do is commit that if we are elected, and people must be selected on merit, incidentally, we must use it as an opportunity to, if we get the opportunity, because there will be very few appointments for this party, to promote diversity. Not only women, but also people from minority ethnic communities. That's a real priority. And incidentally, just one other point. Outrage of people who commit criminal offences, who go to prison and then return to the legislature. That's outrageous. And it's still going on.
I mean, thank you for the answer, both of you. I was a little less satisfied with Tim's reply because I was looking for something, by way of Norman's, for instance, commitment to...
That I won't appoint people
yes,
to give us tons of money.
for
I'm happy
instance.
to make that commitment. I mean, I was basically assuming I won't get money. And what little you do, you've got to use to offset.
The reason I raise this in particular is interviewing peers of all parties in anonymous terms, what I hear again from Labour and Conservative peers in their frank views is those Lib Dems, they're the worst at it. And until we get our...
They would say that,
yes, they would.
Thank you. I'll let Tim come back on it just because the question seemed to be slightly... Go. Yeah.
I mean, just quickly, to merit it. The other thing to say, though, also the need for party finance reform, and that is a fundamental. It's important not to bleat too much when you've lost an election. Gracious towards the loser, but it makes it quite hard to be gracious towards the loser. Spend £30 million on everybody in your constituency to tell them a national message which makes them drop the likes of Vince Cable, who's done an outstanding job for 18 years, for example. That is a major problem, and that's got to be part of it. That's no exciting bungs from people who then stick in Ermin.
Thank you. And Norman, very, very quickly.
I'll just make the point that the whole way designed to corrupt politics. Yeah. As Tim says, with funding issues, and this extraordinary loophole could swamp our seats with national messages which completely had nothing to do with the local limit. And it's the efforts that we went to in the last Parliament to get funding reform, the Tories totally, because they knew worth their while put an occasional scandal in order to ensure that they had the money to buy elections. That's the truth of it, and we always be on the front foot in arguing against it.
We're going to have a final round of questions, and then we'll have to move towards the candidates post-mating. I'm so sorry, there's so many hands up, and you're all going to be so disappointed and cross with me. So, what I was going to ask is James King here? Yes, because you did send me a question on Twitter, so I was going to call it out as a just question, but if you could ask that question, that would be helpful, because I don't think it has been asked. And then we'll go for the lady in the white shirt at the back next to Ruin. It's Tina.
Hi, I'm James King. My question was... a liberal argument of immigration and the common humanity of immigrants.
Thank you very much. Tina?
Thank you very much. Thank you for fantastic to say. All parts, please.
I'm going to... There's a lady with a red jacket on who is so excited. Say where you are, Dave. I'm going to take 4 questions in this round. So turn around, lady in the lovely red jacket right at the back. Yeah.
Now, how are we liberals supposed to encourage children to convince perhaps Christian, Muslims, faith groups, BMEs, teachers, public in schools and what would be our message? What would we be expected to say? And how do we mentor perhaps children and be expected to be seen as liberal?
Thank you. And last question of the day to Daisy.
Thank you. One of the reasons for us in 2010 was because we were seen as a party of... We've screwed up on the issue of trust, and we need to rebuild that. But what will you do and say as leaders so that you are prepared to lead a political insurgency?
Right. Brilliant. So, immigration without hectoring, how benefits of immigration without hectoring people. Tina, Morris, Julia, about what we're offering in terms of such people with children. I couldn't quite hear what you were saying. Sorry. If did the candidates pick up that question? Pressure on it. LGBT. Okay, thank you. And Daisy, can't even.
So, James, first of all, where is James? I don't think we should, first of all, be sort of dismissive in a metropolitan elite way with people who express anxiety or is under pressure, if they're under pressure in trying to get housing. So the response must be that we know that immigration brings enormous economic, and so we should be using that you address as sort of closet racists. And I think that there is a market out there for decency and for making the liberal case. I was on Any Questions just over a week, and we Calais, and I mentioned the fact that there was a photograph in the paper of 2, 10 and 17. The 17-year-old was trying to get the 10-year-old to get them across the channel. They had been in that camp for weeks on end, probably months, with nothing after them. These are children, and they were orphans from Eritrea. And actually the audience recognised in the response to my question inhumanity which we're dealing with this problem. So we have to be sparky and stand up for what's right and for liberal values in these things. And then the final point I would make with regard to immigration, I spent a bit of time with an amazing from Sardinia, was providing the most important personal care to individuals in their own homes. Without people from Sardinia, the whole care system would collapse. Something like close to 20% of care workers across our country come from overseas. How on earth do UKIP think that the system would work if we send those people home? It's outrageous to help our care services and to enhance our culture. And we should celebrate immigration, not denigrate it. Policy too. I think I confirmed that at the Ethics hustings on Monday night, I think it was. But I totally agree that we have a in our party of lack of support for people from groups. So we look like a party that no one would think that they would want to join or associate with a minority ethnic community. We have to root out the reasons why we have failed so badly. And so that must be an urgent priority. And yes, there must be impact assessments raised during the week. And the point I was, it's not actually to just repeal Section 28. If you're a youngster growing up who finds that minority because of culture, the pressure that puts on an individual as they grow up, as a child growing up, as a teenager. So it's no surprise that we find that mental health, the incidence of mental health, is higher amongst teenagers who suffer, who be gay or lesbian. And so we can't just say that we've done the law and that's... We have to work on the culture, and we have to ensure someone is growing up, they know that they can be themselves, whoever they are, that there's nothing wrong with being themselves, and that they will be judged on the broadcasters. in ensuring that that is the case. Daisy. In the last Parliament, and as we ran up to the election, we defined ourselves in relation to we're all told that we must repeat the mantra, we will cut Conservatives and borrow less than Labour. My heart sank, because it says nothing about our purpose and an inspiring message. And then we chose as well, because we said that we will give to the Conservatives and a brain to Labour. So it was saying to people, if you're inclined to support the Conservatives or Labour, we think you either have no brain, but come and vote for us. So the way in which you inspire and ensuring that everyone gets treated equally, no second-class citizens, speak from the heart, I think you can break through.
James, on migration. So I think first of all, I had a very disturbing experience. I can't get accounts to realise this is the age-old problem and the scam of divide and rule. The people at the top, the poor white people, to blame the poor non-white people for the problems caused by the top to provide enough for everyone. And if we are... And so, to be honest with you, so we absolutely don't go denigrating people who vote UKIP. We need those people back. Lots of those people who were ours, who when UKIP did, they considered us not to be the anti-establishment party that we were. We have to understand that UKIP's appeal is a bit more uneven. Imagine we mustn't insult those people, but we must find solutions to the pinch those problems in the first place, and then absolutely not fall into the trap of nuance. If you're on 8 MPs and 7% nuance, we ain't got time for you. We've got to be very clear. Immigration is a blessing, not a curse. We have got to say also, and challenge the notion that it's on the dole in, for example. And there are, I'd put this sensitively, something like getting on for 500,000 older British people who are in the south of Spain. Tina, I mean, I committed when I was president, my job to deliver it, that post-general election we would undertake what we could do. What we mean by that is of our behaviour as a party, structurally, in culturally, top committee. But also, how do branch committees work? How do you get into the party? What are the relationships there? And the extent to which AME communities are excluded or feel undervalued, properly made attracted to, not retained, not elevated. And that means picking somebody over Helena Morris, who will do the same kind of job for us there, and that is something I absolutely undertake to make sure that we do. What have I learned from to employ? I mean, absolutely blinking loads. I don't know how well known it is, and I do tell people this because I'm proud of it. When I was first elected, Andrew Stunnell, who was then the chief whip, rather, appointed lucky old North.
I did.
Yeah, he did pay. So I owe you. And I, having scribbled down the downloading of Norman, I went upstairs afterwards. And it's headed Norman's top tips. It's still on my still stuck with blue tack over my desk in Kendal. And in a nutshell, how you make good use of your time, so you don't waste your time with the pompous periphery of Parliament and do the stuff that actually counts for your constituents and makes a difference. So there's that. But actually, I mean, I am dead proud of it. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that we can't do those things at the moment. But we that background, that respect, and that authority to speak in that subject area. That, amongst other things, I want Norman to be leading on. About, I think about the issue that Norman answered on. I think what I from all that is a reminder that side, and that, I mean, and to a degree, marriage, and that is not the end of the road. We've got to do the gay blood ban when it comes up through the National Health Service. There needs to be, and let's be honest, equal marriage. Absolutely right that we got that on the statute books. We shouldn't celebrate to the extent that we get complacent, because for people who are trans, the spousal veto prevents them in equal marriage. And I would say, though, you mentioned sort of other groups, and we mustn't hector them. That's the key thing. We mustn't hector them. We must understand sometimes, Trotsky, the only revolution that will ever work is the permanent revolution. And I to have meant that when you take power, whether it's being the sole councillor on a parish council or whether it's taking power in government, if you let yourself to become part of the furniture, the set in, what we do in and look at all that sort of stuff, but I tell you, the quality really is, and we've got to be Parliament's face in your, always be your constituency's face in Parliament, the party of the people and for the people.
Everybody ever so much for your questions. I'm going to give our candidates a little pause while they prepare to make their summations, and we're going to have I'm going first and Norman going second. So while they just draw breath, if you have enjoyed the buckets up there, and we'll probably be standing at the door from now on for those who are leaving, if you could please make a donation before you go, that would be Thank you to everybody who has spoken today. We've had lots of speakers in lots of our fringes. Thank you all for coming and to support the SLF. And we couldn't do it without you. A huge thanks to John on the camera. He's been there all day. Way! And as well to Pratik, who's been on the still camera, who's been doing our tech and hidden behind there, everybody on the red and our stewards. And there are two people who deserve particular thanks. Payne, who shapes our agendas so brilliantly. So bravo, bravo. And of course, the person who is our head of events is Mary Reid. Year in, year, it takes an enormous amount of liaising with the venues, with liaising with speakers. You know, there is no end to how much effort she puts in. Tim, over to you for summation.
Righty-ho.
Stand up.
My great fear is that a consensus is building in this country, and it's not one we want. After the Beveridge consensus, the Thatcher consensus, the one that worries me most is that we're moving to a stage in British politics where it is the politics of national division. If you listen to the narrative of years, it's all about somebody else's. Everything is somebody else's fault. It's the fault. Or is the fault poor or the idle rich? It's all somebody else's fault. And I am determined that we should build a consensus and change things that can be active, ambitious and liberal, a social liberal agenda. But all of that means nothing if you can't in local communities or nationally. And we may have a difficult 5 years, and we have had a really difficult 5 years. Knocking on doors to the Liberal Democrats this last 5 years has not always been the most fun available. And I can tell you, going on the telly, being interviewed and all the rest of it has been tricky this last 5 years as a Liberal Democrat. Can I just tell you, we might look back on these years with some fondness. Because in the words of Oscar Wilde, there is only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is talked about. Great enemy now is relevance. And we have to capture the right to be heard. And that means speaking in a language that is powerful to ourselves and to the people out there. That is absolutely critical. We need to make political activism compelling and exciting. We need to get people in their gut. We'll make their decisions for all sorts of reasons. I got involved in this party because I watched Cathy come home as a teenager and it broke my little heart and I wanted to do something about it. My reason, most people who join because something gets them there. Most of you join because something got you here. And I want to do that to tens and hundreds of thousands across this country and inspire them and mobilise them. And I know it's going to be really, really hard work in these weeks and years to follow. To use communication skills and ability to reach people that will help people to see the point of activism. So I used a whole bunch of anecdotes during this campaign, and if you I apologise, but they're all true. And so I went out for a walk with my kids about on the home, and we bumped into a family, a girl. Talking to my 13-year-old girl, and she said, out of my earshot, you should be really proud of your daddy. We were cramped up in a bedsit, and he rehoused us. You should be really proud of your daddy. And my daughter told me this, and I had a little cry. And at that point, I thought, hang about, sweetheart. For the 55 council seat. As a result, we won the council.
We built 1,000 council houses. Sweetheart, you house that family. Be proud of yourself. And if you can take people back who have made such a difference, by golly, the journey becomes more an attractive one to embark upon. And that is absolutely what I want across the whole of. You see, I listen in this debate, and I'm bored sick of the sound of my voice. Norman, I am proud. I am. You may well. You may well be, but I am not. And I am proud of the things that he's achieved. I'm proud of the things that sense of pride, sense of sadness and tragedy too, because losing election is not just personally bruising. It is a way of losing the ability to change people's lives. And that is what struck me most when the dust settled on the 8th of May. We have lost the ability to change people's lives. We need to regain the ability to change people's lives. There is nothing grubby or mandatory noble exercise. And my pitch to you is this. Liberal Democrats change Britain, and we can only do that if we can cut in and be taken seriously. You can change nobody's life from second place. I want to make sure that we win again, and with your help, we will.
Election results. There is an obligation on this room and beyond to rebuild that liberal voice in our country. It's needed now more than ever, and we will see values being under assault always, because liberal values are universal values. This country needs a liberal voice. Obligation on us to build a radical liberal who have to address the way in which we run our party. We do need root and branch reform so that every person has the chance to participate. Every person in our party, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of disability, has the same chance to succeed in our party. And that is not the case at the moment, and it's a disgrace. So we have to change the way in which we behave. We have to again become a really effective election winning machine, because we have fallen behind the curve. Others have overtaken us. We need to learn again that as we campaign, it's all about power to people and to community, giving people again to vote for us, not making assumptions about people, giving people a real to feel in their ideas. Win just by campaigning as a minister. There's a family called the Wills family from Cornwall. Their little son Josh in an institution in Birmingham, hundreds of miles away from home. The family had to travel every weekend to see him. Just said, no one is listening to us. We are ignored. And incidentally, this is a publicly funded by the system. We always have to be on the side. 25th of this month, Josh is due to Cornwall again. And his dad was so relieved that at long last, somebody listened to him. It happened to should be doing the whole time. Insurgents, challenging. And he joined Democrats. And he's supporting me in this, pleased to say. He better well do. But that's what we are fighting for and winning on liberal values. But not just fighting individual cases, recognizing where those individual cases are challenged, to have control over the money that's available for your care. And I hold the Tories to account to ensure that they implement those in law early in this Parliament. That's what we must be doing as Liberals, speaking from the heart, speaking on behalf of those who have no voice, giving to people, powerful citizens in our country. That's the side that we must be on. Fight, and if we do that together, we can succeed. Let's be ambitious. Let's be ambitious. Let's be liberal, progressive, radical movement of change, and we can succeed. Thank you very much.
Fantastic candidates. Aren't we privileged? Aren't we lucky to have such a difficult choice before us? Thank you, everybody. Please do go and drink somewhere now, and see you all again, hopefully at Bournemouth.
Thank you.